I'm telling this story from a hospital bed in Kyiv. The walls are white. The staff wear masks. Outside, pigeons land on the window ledge and leave again, which is more than I can say for what followed me here. I want to be clear about something. I'm not an idiot. I know what Chernobyl is. I know what happened on April 26, 1986. I watched the HBO miniseries twice. I knew the zone was contaminated, that Pripyat had been a ghost town for 40 years, that 50,000 people were evacuated in the middle of the night and never came back. I knew all of that. I went anyway, with full knowledge of the history, because I thought I understood the risks. I was prepared for radiation. I was not prepared for what the radiation had woken up. My name is Mark Chen. I'm 29 years old. I had a travel vlog, 45,000 subscribers. Not famous. Famous enough to keep going. Famous enough to convince myself that going to places where the wrong step could kill me was a reasonable way to spend a life. I was very good at looking like someone who wasn't afraid. I was afraid all the time. My brother died 3 years ago. Danny, 24 years old. He was in the passenger seat. I was driving. I walked away from the crash with a scar on my forearm and a hollow in my chest that I've been filling ever since by pointing myself at dangerous places. It hasn't worked, but I keep going, I keep filming, I keep telling 45,000 people I'm having the time of my life, and most of the time I almost believe it. The Chernobyl booking came through Zone Escapes, luxury extreme tourism, exclusive access, private eco-lodges with panoramic views of abandoned Pripyat, $800 a night, 3 nights minimum. I spent 20 minutes looking at the photos before I hit confirm. The cabin was stunning. Floor-to-ceiling windows, poured concrete floors with radiant heating, a full kitchen with a proper espresso machine, a freestanding tub, a king bed in white linen. It looked like something from an architecture magazine. It looked like the exact last thing you'd expect 2 kilometers from reactor number 4. I filmed my reaction for the thumbnail. Big eyes, open mouth. It did numbers before I even got on the plane. I flew into Kyiv, drove south to the zone, and met Yulia at the checkpoint. She was in her 50s, silver hair cut close, with the posture of someone who had been standing in difficult places for a long time. She wore a dark green field jacket with the Zone Escapes logo on the chest, a stylized outline of the Reactor 4 cooling towers. She shook my hand with a firm grip and smiled with the professional warmth of someone who had performed this exact greeting 100 times before. I already had my camera out. Of course I did. "Tell the people what we're doing here," I said, framing us both in the shot. She looked at the lens. Not at me, at the lens itself, like she wanted to be seen clearly. "You'll be staying at the Pripyat View Eco Lodge," she said. "Private cabin, 3-day exclusive access. The experience has been designed to be both immersive and safe, provided guests follow the property guidelines." "Provided they follow the guidelines," I repeated, grinning at the camera. "Spooky. Love it." Yulia didn't smile back. I noticed that, but I was still compositing the shot in my head, and I almost missed the way her eyes swept the tree line behind me. Not a casual glance, a scan. The kind of eyes moving in pattern sweep that people develop when they've learned from experience what they're looking for and find no comfort in not finding it. She drove me through the checkpoint and down a recently paved road through the old forest. Birch trees pressed close on both sides, pale and bare for autumn. Old structures showed through the tree line. A rusted gate, a collapsed wall, buildings absorbed back into the land over 40 years of patient growth. Pripyat was reclaiming everything. "Eco-certified construction," Yulia said as we drove. "Geothermal heating. The building uses ground source energy for the radiant floor system." "So the heat comes from underground," I said. "From below the frost line, yes." Good imagery. I was still thinking like a content creator. I didn't understand yet that some good imagery has teeth. The cabin appeared through the trees, and I said something out loud that I later cut from the footage, something unguarded and sincere. Quietly, "Oh, that's actually beautiful." It was. The Pripyat View Eco Lodge sat on a cleared platform at the forest's edge with the abandoned city spread before it like a painting. Floor-to-ceiling windows ran the full front face, and through them I could see the interior, pale concrete floors, clean kitchen lines, an enormous sectional sofa positioned to face the view. Pripyat was visible, blocky Soviet towers with empty eyes, the cultural center, and on the horizon, the rusted orange arc of the old amusement park Ferris wheel. The autumn sky was turning gold above it all, and everything in that view, the dead city, the Ferris wheel, the ghost of 50,000 ordinary lives, was rendered in that dying light. I stood before those windows and felt something genuine. Then I looked at the floor. The concrete was warm, even through my boots. The geothermal heat rose through the slab with a steady, low-grade radiance, like standing on something that was breathing. I did not think about what that meant. Not yet. Yulia's orientation was quick. Smart home controls by the front door. Lights, thermostat, blinds, cameras, full kitchen, wine rack, the bathroom, and hanging from a brass hook on the bathroom door, a square of black cloth the size of a hand towel. "For the mirror," she said. I looked at the cloth, then at the frameless mirror above the sink. "For the mirror," I repeated. "You'll read about it in the guidelines." The guidelines were a leather-bound booklet on the kitchen counter, the Zone Escapes logo embossed in silver on the cover. Thicker than I expected, 20 pages, section dividers, small diagrams. Someone had put real effort into producing it, which was either impressive or subtly alarming in the way something is alarming when the care taken implies the care is necessary. "Read it completely before sunset," she said. "All sections, including the addenda. This is a lot of reading for a vacation rental. This is not an ordinary vacation rental." She said it without inflection. Not ominous, not theatrical, just a fact stated the way you'd tell someone a stovetop was still hot. She was watching me with the patience of someone who has said something true to many people and watched most of them decide not to fully believe it. "The previous guests," she said, gathering her jacket. "The ones who didn't follow the guidelines carefully. They didn't check out on time." A pause. They didn't check out at all. I waited for her to smile. She set the key on the counter and walked toward the door. "Don't need help before I return," she said from the threshold. "Read the book. Follow the rules, exactly as written. They are not atmosphere, they are instructions." She paused at the door. "Read about the offering first, before dark." Then she was gone. Her Land Cruiser pulled away and the forest closed behind it, and I was alone in the silence, holding a leather rule book and a brass key, standing on heated floors, humming with warmth from somewhere far below. I set up my camera, hit record. "Okay," I said. "First impressions." I read the rule book in the 2 hours before sunset. 6 rules, each with a body of instructions and a subsection marked Y in bold. I read the Y sections twice. For the vlog, I filmed myself reading portions aloud. Rule 1. Close the smart blinds by 11:30 p.m. Do not open until 5 a.m. Do not investigate tapping. Do not respond if you hear your name called from outside. I looked at the camera. Okay, spooky cabin content. Love it. Rule 2. The basement door behind the pantry, sealed with an electronic lock and 3 padlocks. Do not open. Do not acknowledge knocking from behind it. If you hear your own voice calling for help, leave the cabin immediately. Rule 4 got a genuine laugh. If the playing stops and is followed by silence, that means they've chosen your cabin. Do not move. Do not breathe. I looked at the camera. The rulebook says, "Do not breathe, guys." I turned the camera off after that. Before the light fully died, I walked the property. The deck wrapped around the side of the cabin, giving a view of the forest edge and, beyond the birch trees to the north, the dark silhouettes of Pripyat's apartment blocks. It was during this walk that I noticed the other cabin, 200 meters through the sparse undergrowth, half hidden by pale trunks but clearly identical in construction, the same flat roof, the same panoramic windows, the same warm amber glow from inside. A thin line of smoke rose from what I assumed was a utility vent. Someone else was out here. I stared for a moment, then raised my hand in a slow wave, though the distance made any response impossible to see. I filed it away as interesting content. 2 strangers in the exclusion zone, 2 identical luxury boxes placed at careful intervals in the dead city's shadow. I went back inside before it got fully dark. The offering was Rule 6. Every night before sleep, place food on the deck railing. Not the table, the railing. Bread best. Then go inside and close the blinds and do not watch to see what took it. In the morning, the food would be gone. This meant you were tolerated. If the food remained at dawn, do not touch it. Leave through the front door, walk to the road, wait for sunrise. If the food remained untouched, they had decided you were the offering instead. I cut 2 thick slices from the sourdough loaf and carried them to the deck. The cold evening air smelled of forest and something mineral beneath it, old concrete in winter. I placed the bread on the railing, not the table, laughed quietly at myself for following the instruction with such care, and went back inside. I closed the smart blinds at 11:28 p.m., 2 minutes early. The blackout panels descended over the panoramic windows with a sound like a slow exhale. Pripyat disappeared. I was sealed inside a luxury box in the exclusion zone with warm floors and cold coffee and a rule book I no longer found amusing. I got into bed with every light in the cabin burning, turned on a podcast, something about lighthouses, the kind of voices you use as furniture, and told myself I was going to sleep. The rules were marketing. The bread on the railing was a game. I was fine. The tapping started at midnight. Almost exactly midnight. 3 taps. A pause of 4 seconds. 3 more taps. I held still. The podcast kept talking, and I told myself it was a branch. Too rhythmic for a branch, too consistent. No wind between the taps, no creak of wood, nothing that would explain the regularity. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps, again and again. Then, "Mark?" I stopped breathing. "Mark, let me in. It's so cold out here." My mother's voice, exact and unmistakable. The particular pitch of her concern, the way she softened the consonants of my name. My mother's voice, coming from directly outside the sealed smart blinds. My mother was in California. She had texted me 3 hours ago to ask if I had landed safely. I did not move. I did not breathe. I did not respond. The tapping continued. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps. Patient and methodical, like something with all the time in the world. Not desperate, not trying to break through, just waiting to be let in. My mother's voice came twice more. A third voice came once, higher and shorter, that I did not try to identify. At some point, the smart blinds made a small sound, like the mechanism was being tested from the outside, like something was learning what they were and whether they could be moved. I kept my hands flat on the duvet and my breathing slow and shallow, and I watched the ceiling until the tapping stopped. 3 a.m. Exactly 3 a.m. I didn't sleep. I lay in the fully lit cabin and listened to the absolute silence that followed and waited for the light to come. At 5 a.m., the sky visible above the top edge of the blinds shifted from black to the charcoal of early dawn. I got up. I went to the smart home panel. I raised the blinds. The deck was empty. The bread was gone from the railing. I exhaled, one long breath, and stepped close to the glass. Handprints on the outside, small, child-sized, covering the lower half of the window in overlapping layers, different pressures, different sizes, some smeared as if the hand had dragged slowly downward while the owner looked in. Dozens of them, more than dozens. I stepped back. I counted without meaning to. The smallest were no bigger than a 4-year-old's hand. The largest barely a child of 10 or 11. All of them pressed from outside, all of them pressing in. The Eco Lodge had opened in 2023, the handprints had not. I understood that clearly, the overlapping layers, the accumulation of sizes and pressures across many visits, many seasons. These hands had not come from guests pressing their faces outward to see the city. They had come from the other side, coming to whatever warmth existed in this cold, dead place, pressing themselves against the barrier, learning the shapes of the people within, coming to the glass the way cold things come to fire, not with malice, with need. The smart blinds descended by themselves then, not at my command, the mechanism activating without input, and sealed the glass and covered the handprints, and I stood on the warm concrete floor in the quiet, sealed cabin, and understood, completely and without any remaining doubt, that the rules were not atmosphere. I counted the handprints one last time before they disappeared behind the panels. They overlapped. Different sizes, different years. They'd all stood where I stood. They'd all looked in. They'd all seen something looking back. The smart blinds closed. I didn't open them again. I didn't sleep after the handprints. I lay on the sectional with the lights on and the sealed blinds between me and whatever had pressed its hands to the glass, and I listened to the floor breathe. That's the only word for it. The geothermal warmth pulsed through the concrete in slow intervals, and in the silence of a dead city, it felt deliberate, like something paying attention. By 5:30, I was on my second coffee, watching the birch trees lighten from dark gray to silver as the sky came up behind the overcast. I'd covered the bathroom mirror the night before without remembering doing it. I found the black cloth over the glass when I went in to wash my face, draped with a precision that felt like a habit I hadn't known I'd formed. I stood in the doorway and looked at it and felt something close to satisfaction. A locked door. Useful. Even against something you're not certain exists. I went to the deck door and opened it carefully. Cold air, mineral smell, the quiet of the exclusion zone. The deck was empty. The bread was gone from the railing, both slices clean. I exhaled and went back inside. Gone bread meant tolerated. 1 day down. 2 to go. By 9, I was filming. Partly professional reflex, partly the old habit of putting glass between me and the world. A camera makes the world smaller and more manageable. And I'd been using one as a distance mechanism since Danny died. I filmed the heated floors, the espresso machine, the rulebook on the counter. I filmed myself eating toast at the kitchen island, talking to the lens about the great night's sleep I'd had. I deleted that section later. I wasn't ready to lie, and I wasn't ready to tell the truth. I stepped outside and stood on the deck and looked at the main window from the outside for the first time. The handprints were still there. Faint, condensation smeared, but present. Dozens of small palm impressions at the lower half of the glass, at child height, pressed flat. In the morning light, they looked almost gentle, like someone putting a hand to a cold window to write their name. I panned my camera north along the tree line, and there was the other cabin. 200 meters through the sparse birch trunks, same flat roof, same panoramic windows, same pale concrete. The front door opened, and a figure appeared. Tall, dark jacket, holding a camera. I raised my hand. He raised his. Then he stepped off his deck and walked toward me through the trees. His name was Lev Marchenko. 34, Russian, a documentary filmmaker, personal project on the zone's mythology. Its weight, why people kept coming back. High cheekbones, dark eyes, the particular calm of someone who had developed systems for functioning, regardless of what they saw. He shook my hand and looked at my camera with something short of approval. "Travel vlog?" he said. "Dark tourism," I said, as if the distinction mattered. He smiled slightly. "You'll leave thinking you understood it. You won't." It should have irritated me. Instead, it landed somewhere honest. His cabin was identical in layout. Same open plan, same heated floors, same kitchen island, same sectional facing the panoramic view. His camera gear was spread across the dining table. On the kitchen counter beside his espresso machine sat a leather-bound booklet with the Zone Escapes logo embossed in silver. He picked it up and held it out to me. "Different from yours," he said. I'd brought mine. We sat at his island and compared them side by side. The structure was identical. 6 rules, same formal register, same careful language, but the specifics diverged significantly. Rule 1 matched. Rule 6, the offering, matched. But my Rule 2 described the basement door, electronic lock, 3 padlocks, the voice from behind it. His Rule 2 described a crawl space in the utility room, sealed with 2 padlocks and a manual bolt. My Rule 4 described the deck. His Rule 4 described the roof access hatch, warning about what gathered on the roof between 1 and 3 a.m. and how to barricade it from inside. "Every cabin is different," Lev said, not reading, reciting, like something he'd already worked out. "Every foundation is different. They tailor the rules to what's underneath." Who's they? Yulia. Whoever built these. Someone knows what's here. Someone has been learning it for a long time. These rules weren't written by guessing. I thought about Yulia's eyes on the tree line. The way she'd said this is not an ordinary vacation rental with no inflection at all. "Have you been in the zone before?" I said. 5 years ago. Different rental, different rules. I followed them. I survived. He looked at the tree line. The north edge of the forest behind both cabins. My cameraman didn't. His name was Dmitri. He went out after midnight on the second night. He heard a child crying from the forest. He was soft-hearted, the kind of person who can't hear something in pain and not go toward it. I watched from the window. I followed my rules. Didn't open the door. He went into the trees. The crying stopped the moment he crossed the first line of birches. Lev picked up his coffee. That's how I knew he was already gone, not when he disappeared. When the sound stopped, it didn't need him to come farther. It already had him. The kitchen was very quiet. The floor breathed. "He's still out there," Lev said. "Somewhere. I don't think it works like death here. Not exactly." We explored the property in the afternoon while the daylight held. Lev had already scouted the perimeter and led me along paths he'd cleared mentally, moving with the economy of someone who knew which parts of a landscape rewarded curiosity and which parts didn't. The abandoned kindergarten was 300 meters into the forest, found by smell before sight, dry rot, Soviet concrete dissolving into earth. Single-story, roof partially caved, windows long gone. Inside one empty frame, we could see the remains of a classroom. Child-height tables, still upright. A chalkboard on the far wall with Cyrillic writing neither of us moved closer to read. On a shelf beside the chalkboard, arranged with a precision that had no natural explanation, sat a row of dolls. Cloth bodies, painted porcelain faces, each one positioned to face the window where we stood. "Don't go in," Lev said without emphasis. I didn't go in. I filmed through the window frame for 30 seconds and then lowered the camera. The dolls watched with their painted eyes, and the silence around the kindergarten had a different quality from the forest silence. Thicker, more intentional, like air that had been holding its breath for 40 years and gotten very good at it. On the walk back, Lev stopped once and stood completely still. I almost walked into him. He was looking at the tree line to our left, north, where the forest deepened toward the old city's outskirts. "What?" I said. "I'm not sure." He started walking again. I looked back once. The undergrowth was still, but the stillness had a held quality, as if something had stopped moving a half-second before I turned. We separated before sunset. His last words were delivered at the point where the paths between our cabins diverged, pragmatic and final. "Follow your rules, not mine. Your rules are written for your foundation. Mine are for mine. If you try to apply my instructions to your cabin, you'll be protected for the wrong thing. Stay in your cabin. Follow your book exactly." I followed my book exactly. Cameras disabled after sunset per Rule 3, each lens covered with the opaque tape from the utility drawer. Bathroom mirror covered per Rule 5. Dinner made and eaten on the sofa with the rulebook beside me like a reference document I might need quickly. Blinds closed at 11:28 p.m. Bread on the railing at 11:40, placed on the railing and not the table, and then inside, door locked, not watching. I went to bed at midnight with every light burning. The children found my cabin at 1:09 a.m. Laughter first, light, distant, the kind the brain classifies as benign before the context catches up. Children laughing in the exclusion zone at 1 a.m., running feet on the deck boards, too quick and too light for adults. Then a voice counting, high, clear, carrying perfectly through the glass. "Odin, DVA, try. 1, 2, 3. Ready or not, here we come." I covered my face with the pillow. Rule 4. Do not look toward the sound. I pressed down and breathed through it and thought about Dimitri walking into the trees because he heard something crying, and I did not look. The counting stopped. The running stopped. The deck went silent in exactly the way the rulebook had described, the specific silence that follows a choice being made. Then, knocking on the glass deck door, low, child height. 3 knocks, pause, 3 more. "We found you." The voice was gentle and pleased, the game-won satisfaction of a child who has searched and located exactly what they were looking for. "Open up. It's your turn to hide." I did not move. I did not breathe. I thought about Danny, not the accident, not the hospital. Danny before, the specific pitch of his laugh. Mark, he used to call me, which I'd hated and would give anything to hear again. 3 more knocks, higher, more insistent. "We can wait. We're very good at waiting." They were. The knocking continued in irregular bursts for almost 2 hours. Never frantic, never angry, just patient and certain, something that knew it had time. At 2:40, it stopped. The silence was absolute. I didn't move. At 3 a.m. exactly, the silence changed quality. Something released, something withdrew. I lay still for 3 more minutes to be certain, then lowered the pillow from my face and stared at the ceiling. At 3:01 a.m., Lev screamed. One sound, clean and full-throated, from the direction of his cabin, cutting through 200 meters of birch forest and the walls of my cabin both. Then, silence. Complete silence where his cabin had been. I sat up. My hand found the door handle automatically. Then I stopped. Rule 4, do not leave the cabin between 1 and 3 a.m. I checked my phone. 3:03 a.m. 2 minutes passed. 2 minutes past the window. I sat back down and put my hands on my knees and told myself I was past the window. I could go. I sat there for another 22 minutes before I believed it enough to move. At 5 a.m., I raised the blinds and stepped outside. Lev's cabin was dark. The front door stood open at a slight angle, not broken, not forced, just open the way. A door stands when someone left quickly and didn't look back. I walked the 200 meters through the birch trees in the cold gray morning and went inside. His camera was on the floor, recording light still on. I picked it up, checked the charge, 6% remaining, and played back the last footage. Timestamp 2:52 a.m. Lev filming his own living room in the low voice of someone making a record, narrating in Russian and occasional English, every light on, rulebook open on the counter behind him. He was following his protocol. He was being careful. Then his utility room door, visible over his shoulder in the background, swung open by itself. No sound before it moved. No creak, no approach. Just closed, and then open. He turned to look. The camera caught the back of his head and his shoulders, very still, and on the floor of the utility room through the open doorway. The crawl space hatch was rising. He screamed. The camera fell. Footage ended. The final frame, caught in the half-second before the camera hit the floor, showed his smart TV in the background. Dark glass. In that dark glass, a reflection. Lev's face, positioned exactly as it should have been given the camera's angle, except in the reflection, he was smiling. Wide and still and utterly certain, the expression of someone who has been waiting for exactly this moment and is very pleased it has arrived. He hadn't been smiling. He had been screaming. I backed out of his cabin without turning around, through the doorway, down the deck steps, backward across the frost-stiff grass between our cabins, eyes on his open front door until the birch trunks came between us. I did not run. I walked backwards slowly and carefully, the way you move when you don't want something to track your fear. I should not have looked back, but I did. Lev's cabin, 200 meters away through the trees, his panoramic windows facing me through the pale birch trunks, and in his smart TV, visible in the dark glass from across the distance and the cold morning air, the reflection of his living room. A figure standing in that reflection, smiling, not looking at the space where Lev had fallen, looking at me, through his window, through the glass, through my own smart blinds, which had opened by themselves while I stood watching, the blackout panels rising silently, automatically, as if something wanted me to have a clear view of what was in the glass. I backed the last 3 steps to my door and went inside. I did not look at my smart TV. I covered every reflective surface I could find. I sat on the sofa with my hands flat on my knees and Lev's rule book in front of me beside my own, his open to Rule 4, mine to Rule 5, and I understood that whatever had been wearing Lev's face had been doing so since before I met him, maybe since his first night. And it had stood across a kitchen island from me and told me to follow my rules. And the only reason I was here and Lev was not was because I had. I opened my rulebook to Rule 2. I read it 3 times. Then I looked at the pantry. I closed the smart blinds manually. That was the first thing. Before the rulebook. Before covering the reflective surfaces. Before anything else. The panels had been open since whatever raised them at the end of the previous night, and I stood at the smart home panel and pressed close and watched the blackout panels descend and felt one small, specific thing: control. I held on to it. I covered every surface I could find. TV, oven glass. The bathroom mirror was already done. I used towels for the appliances, draped with the same flat finality that had become habit over 3 days. Lev's rulebook was still on the counter beside mine. 2 leather-bound booklets, 1 owner gone. I read Rule 2 of my own book 4 more times until I had it memorized. Electronic lock, 3 padlocks. Don't open. Don't acknowledge knocking. If you hear crying, do not investigate. If you hear your own voice calling for help, leave the cabin immediately. I turned that last line over carefully. My own voice, not Lev's. Mine. The bread was still on the railing. I stepped out in the early gray light to check it, and I already knew. Both slices, exactly as I'd placed them the night before, untouched. I stood on the frost-covered deck for 1 breath, and then stepped back inside and locked both the door lock and the secondary bolt. The rulebook's language came automatically. Do not touch it. Leave the cabin immediately. Walk to the road. I tried that option next. I tried Yulia first. 4 calls, 1 ring each, voicemail. Texts sent with the thin signal I had left. Then the car. The rental SUV was in the gravel pull-off exactly where I'd left it. The key fob worked. The engine turned over, caught for 2 seconds, died. Again, caught, died. I tried 8 times. Fuel gauge read 3/4 full. The engine would start and then cut as if something had removed its permission to run. I sat in the cold car and looked at the access road stretching through the birch trees and understood. 12 kilometers to the checkpoint. The dark would come before I got there on foot. The rulebook was clear about what owned the dark. I went back inside. Yulia had said noon on day 4. That was tomorrow, 18 hours. I spent the day in the arithmetic of survival, inventorying the kitchen, reading the rulebook addenda I'd only skimmed on the first night. 2 pages of smaller print, different tone, a second author's voice. They described the zone's accommodation reflex, how entities adjusted to new structures, and stated that the 3rd night was always the worst. I put the book down and made dinner early and placed bread on the railing at 5:30 p.m., hours before necessary, because I was not going to get the offering wrong. I said nothing. I placed it on the railing, not the table, and went back inside without looking at the city. At 11:20 p.m., I closed the smart blinds, 8 minutes early. At 8:13 p.m., I heard Lev's voice from the pantry. I was on the sofa with both rule books when it came. His voice, low and urgent, muffled by the pantry wall, but unmistakably his cadence, his accent, his way of starting sentences mid-thought. "Mark, I'm down here. They took me. I'm in the dark and I can't." I stopped breathing. Behind the pantry shelving unit, the basement door, electronic lock, 3 padlocks. I knew it was a trap. I knew it the way you know a stove is hot before you touch it, not from calculation, but from something older. I knew it was the zone using what it had found in Lev, the same way it had used my mother's voice on the first night. I sat still, and I did not speak, and I heard the rulebook in my head. Do not acknowledge it. If you hear crying, do not investigate. "Mark, please. They're close. Open the door. We can run." I thought about Lev's camera footage, the timestamp at 2:52 a.m. on night 2, the crawl space hatch rising, his reflection smiling in the TV while he screamed. Whatever had come up through his foundation had not been Lev for at least 36 hours. But I stood up. I am telling you this honestly. I walked to the pantry and put my hand on the doorframe, and I listened to his voice. The exact voice that had said, "Follow your rules, not mine," with the tone of someone who actually wanted me to survive. And the guilt moved through me like a current. When he screamed at 3:01 a.m., I had sat on my bed and waited 22 minutes because the rules said to. I had followed the rules, and Lev was gone. "Mark?" His voice dropped lower. "I know you're there. I can hear you breathing. Just open the door. That's all." I opened the pantry. The shelving unit was exactly as described in the orientation, and behind it, set into the wall, the door. Heavy steel, painted gray. The electronic lock mounted at eye height, red indicator light on, a quiet rhythmic beeping, patient and counting. 3 padlocks in a vertical row, each the size of my fist. "Open it." His voice came from directly behind the door now, close enough that I could almost believe there was nothing between us but steel. "I've been down here so long, you know I'm real." My hand went to the first padlock. I held its weight. The floor was warm beneath my feet. His voice was so precisely, exactly Lev's. The consonants, the rhythm, the particular flatness of his English, and the rational part of my brain was producing reasons why it might be real. He'd survived, found the tunnels, reached the basement access. He was right there. Then the voice said, "Mark, help me. I can't get out. Mark, please, help me. I can't get out." Not Lev's voice. my voice. My own pitch, my own intonation, the exact register I use when I'm scared and trying not to show it. One voice had become another without a seam. The transition had been smooth enough that I hadn't noticed it until it was complete. I let go of the padlock. I grabbed my coat from the hook by the door and I walked out of the cabin. I did not run. I closed the front door behind me and I stood on the frost-covered gravel in the dark and I counted. The rulebook said 10 minutes. I counted to 600. I looked at the gravel between my feet and did not look at the cabin windows and did not look at the tree line and counted, and at 600 I went back inside. The pantry door was closed, the shelving unit flush against the wall, the electronic lock dark. No indicator, no beeping, silence from behind the door, as if whatever had been there had packed and left the moment I walked out. When you return, the sounds will stop. They had. I looked through the deck glass at the railing. The bread was still there, untouched. 8:47 p.m. I called Yulia one more time, voicemail after one ring. I sat with the untouched bread visible through the glass, and I understood what it meant with a clarity that had no room for negotiation. The zone had refused payment. It had decided it wanted something else. They've decided you're the offering now. The phone rang. Unknown number. I answered on the first ring. You called. Yulia's voice, clear, professional, without inflection. That many times means something went wrong. Tell me. I told her everything. Lev, the footage, the voice from the pantry, both voices, his and then mine, the untouched bread. She was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, the professional warmth was still present, but underneath it was something more fundamental, the focus of someone doing necessary work. You're in trouble, but not dead. Those are different things out there. Listen carefully and do exactly what I say in exactly the order I say it. A pause. Under the bathroom sink. Emergency kit. White box. Orange lid. Get it now. Don't hang up. I found it behind the cleaning supplies. White plastic box. Orange lid. Inside, a folded gas mask. A small amber bottle of tablets labeled in Ukrainian. A mason jar of black soil, coarse and dark, sealed with wax at the edge. I described each item. Good. Open the bottle. Swallow 2 tablets. Just 2. They burned going down, sharply medicinal, left a cold, bitter trace. The mask. Over your face. Don't seal the straps yet. Soil in your left coat pocket. Not the right. Left. I did each thing as she named it. Now cut 2 slices of bread. Go to the deck. Place them on the railing. Then say aloud, I am a guest. I mean no harm. I offer what I have. Say it clearly. Come back inside and tell me what happens. Rule 1 says, it's not midnight and this is not the same as looking. Go. I placed the bread on the railing and I stood in the cold, black air with the dead city spread before me, and I said the 3 sentences clearly, like a knock that was asking permission rather than demanding entry. I watched the bread for a full minute. It didn't take, I told her. Another pause, shorter this time. All right, seal the mask straps. Go to the utility closet at the back of the hallway. There's a telescoping ladder on the wall. At the end of the hallway, there's a roof hatch. Latch lock, opens inward. I need you on the roof. Yulia, the roof is open sky. Whatever follows you up there cannot cross into it. It doesn't belong to any of them, but it will wait at the hatch. Once you're up, you cannot come back down alone. Stay in the center of the roof. Don't approach the edges. Don't look over the edge. Don't look down at the hatch once you've stepped away from it. I found the ladder. I extended it in the hallway. Climbed it with the mask fogging at the edges and the jar of soil heavy in my left pocket, and I pushed the hatch open and pulled myself through. The roof. Flat, 12 by 15 meters, low lip at the edge. The zone spread in every direction in the cold dark. Pripyat on 3 sides, forest on the 4th, and to the south, the Ferris wheel and the dark mass of the reactor enclosure 2 kilometers away. I stood in the center of the roof, and the cold pressed through the mask, and I held the phone. I'm up, I said. Good. Stay in the center. I'm already driving. I'll be there before dawn. Don't respond to anything from the hatch or the edges. Nothing at all. The signal held for 11 minutes. Then the line dropped. I stood in the center of the roof and waited. The scratching started at 1:14 a.m. at the hatch, fingernails on painted metal, patient and exploratory. Then Lev's voice rising through the opening from the hallway below. "Mark, let me up. It's cold down here. I can see the sky." I didn't respond. I watched the Ferris wheel. At 1:40, a child's voice from the hatch. The same voice that had said we found you on the second night. "We found you again. You can play up here." At 2:15, my mother's voice, rising from somewhere below. "Mark, I came all this way. Let me in." I turned away from the hatch. I faced north toward the forest, and I thought about Danny, not the accident, but before, teaching me to drive. Patient about it in a way he wasn't patient about anything else, because it meant getting out of the house, the way he'd looked at me when I passed the test. I pressed my hands flat against my coat pockets, and I stood still, and I let the voices cycle. Lev, the child, my mother, something speaking Ukrainian, urgent and soft, as if I had failed something specific. I did not respond to any of them. The scratching continued in the intervals, patient and learning. At 4:30 a.m., the scratching stopped. Not faded. Stopped, like a door closing on the other side. The voices stopped with it. The silence that followed was clean and high, different from the night silences below, and I understood what Yulia had meant. Open sky was genuinely neutral, and the entity's absence in it was not reluctance, but incapacity. I stood in the center and waited. At 5:03 a.m., headlights cut through the birch trees on the access road. Yulia was on the roof in 4 minutes, dark jacket, silver hair, Zone Escapes logo, moving with the efficiency of someone who had done this before and was grimly unsurprised to be doing it again. She grabbed my arm. "Down. Don't look at the hatch when we pass it." We descended fast. Hatch latched behind us. Through the hallway, past the pantry without looking, past the rulebooks on the counter, out through the front door and into the Land Cruiser, and moving before I'd fully closed my door. I looked back once as the forest closed behind us. The roof hatch was open. She had latched it from above. It was open. A figure stood at its edge. Lev's height, Lev's jacket, Lev's posture, raising one hand in a slow, certain wave. The wave of something that knows exactly where you're going and has all the time in the world to wait. Behind him, smaller figures lined the parapet. 4, 5, more. Children shapes, still and smiling, watching the Land Cruiser the way children watch something interesting through a window. I faced forward. Yulia didn't speak until we hit the checkpoint. She stopped the car, and when she looked at me, her eyes had the same quality as the first day. Scanning, assessing, recording. "You followed the rules," she said. "That's why you're here. Lev didn't. That's why he's still there. Don't ask about him again. Don't look at the photos you took. Don't watch your footage." She paused. Some things don't want to be seen, and once they're seen, they don't let go. I nodded. I didn't look back, but I felt them watching. I still feel them watching. The hospital was white. The particular white of a government facility, not warm cream, but the white of surfaces cleaned because they have to be. Clean in a way that implies what they've held before. I lay in a bed and looked at the ceiling and listened to the machines measure things about me I couldn't measure myself. I'm alive. I followed the rules, and I'm alive. Someone had taken the gas mask. The jar of black soil was on the bedside table. Someone had moved it from my coat pocket and placed it there, and I reached for it without thinking, the way you reach for a phone. The wax seal was intact. The soil was dark and cold and still. The staff wore respirators, standard protocol for zone extraction cases. They asked logistical questions. What time did you enter? What route? Did you consume food or water from the property? I answered everything. They wrote it down and came back the next day with the same questions, and the day after, and by the fourth repetition, I understood they weren't checking my answers against what I'd said before. They were checking them against something else, some other account of the same place, some other person's version of the same 3 days. The officials came on the third day, a man and a woman in civilian clothes that didn't fit right, the ill fit of people who usually wear uniforms. They placed a recording device on the tray table, and the man said, "You were in the exclusion zone in an unauthorized structure. The rental company is under investigation. You're lucky to be alive." I told them everything, from the checkpoint forward, Yulia, the rule book, the heated floors, the beauty of the cabin, and how it made the rules easier to ignore and then impossible to. The first night, my mother's voice at the glass, the handprints. The second day, Lev, 2 rule books compared across a kitchen island, the abandoned kindergarten. The second night, the children counting on the deck, Lev's scream at 3:01 a.m., the footage with the crawl space hatch rising, and Lev's reflection smiling in the TV when he hadn't been. The third day, untouched bread, the car failing, the voice from behind the basement door that started as Lev's and ended as mine. Leaving. Counting to 600 in the dark, the roof, the hatch, the scratching, the voices, Yulia at 5:03 a.m. They listened. They wrote things down. They did not react. Not to the handprints, not to the voice that became my own, not to the hatch opening after Yulia had latched it. They had the composure of people for whom this was not new information. The woman said, "Yulia has been operating as an extraction guide for 20 years. In that time, she's managed 18 emergency extractions. Every guest who followed the rules survived. Every guest who did not, did not." "I followed the rules," I said. "Yes, that's why you're here." Lev followed his rules. He had a rule book. He read it. He compared it with mine. Lev Marchenko did not follow his rules. The man's voice was measured. His rule 2 addressed the crawl space in his utility room, sealed with 2 padlocks and a manual bolt. Security footage from the cabin's exterior camera shows him in that utility room at 11:47 p.m. on his first night. Not his second, his first. I sat with that. His first night. The same night I'd heard my mother's voice at the glass and held the smart blinds closed. "He told me he'd followed the rules," I said, when we compared rule books. He described Rule 2 correctly. What was in his cabin when you met him was not Lev Marchenko. Lev Marchenko broke Rule 2 on his first night. What came up through his crawl space wore what it found. What sat across from you at the kitchen island already knew the rules because it had access to the rule book. It told you to follow your rules because you staying in your cabin, staying manageable, staying predictable, meant you were within reach for when it was ready. The room was very quiet. I thought about the kitchen island, the 2 rule books side by side, the coffee. "Follow your rules, not mine," said with the exact tone of someone who actually wanted me to survive. The thing had used that tone because the real Lev had used it, and it had all of him to work from. "Lev's reflection," I said. The last frame on the camera. He was smiling. He wasn't smiling when he screamed. His reflection was the last place the original consciousness was legible. The entity had taken everything else. The reflection lagged. That is consistent with other cases. I thought about that without speaking. The real Lev had still been in the glass in that last half second. The smile, not the entity's, because the entity was behind the camera, screaming. The smile was Lev, using the only movement available to him, in the only surface still honest. Maybe trying to show me something. Maybe glad to be seen, even then. The woman opened a laptop and turned it toward me. Satellite imagery. The 2 cabins from above, cleared land, access roads, forest edge, the dead city's grid beyond. My cabin looked like a cabin. Clear space around it. Lev's cabin was surrounded. Not 2 or 3 figures. Dozens, still, at varying distances. Some at the railing, some on the road, some at the forest edge. All of them waiting with the patience of things that did not experience time the way things with a pulse did. "When was this taken?" I said. "The morning after your extraction." I looked at my cabin on the screen. Empty. I had followed the rules and the zone had nothing left to wait for. Lev's cabin still had everything. "The luxury cabins," I said. "Zone escapes. The whole operation." "A mistake," the man said without inflection, as though he'd said the same word about the same thing many times. "Beautiful construction, heated floors, panoramic views, built directly over the most active subsurface structures in the zone, structures that predate the disaster, in some cases predate the city. The developers submitted no geological survey, no consultation with relevant authorities." He paused. "They chose not to know. There is a difference. We have 40 years of documentation ahead of us." I thought about the geothermal warmth pulsing through the concrete. A gift from below. Accept the warmth. Do not ask where it comes from. Someone had known. Someone had written that line, knowing exactly what was underneath. "The basement," I said. "What's down there?" The original building's basement connects to the maintenance tunnels. In April 1986, 11 liquidators entered those tunnels for the initial containment operation. 3 came back, the ones who turned around first. The 8 who continued are still working. The tunnels are their perimeter. Your cabin's concrete slab is their ceiling. He looked at his folded hands. The electronic lock on the basement door is not there to keep you out. It is there to keep the door locked from the inside. I lay still and thought about 3 days of walking across their ceiling. 3 days of cooking and talking and filming. 8 men in the dark beneath me who had been searching for 40 years, who had finally heard footsteps directly above their heads and had been, in their patient and thorough way, very interested. They ran tests for a week. Radiation came back normal every time. On the 6th day, the doctor came in and sat at the end of my bed and said, "Your radiation panels are clear. There are some secondary markers slightly elevated. We'd like to monitor them at 6-month intervals." "What markers?" I said. She named several things in Ukrainian and translated them into medical English I didn't fully follow. When I asked what it meant in plain terms, she said it was too early to characterize and monitoring was appropriate. She said monitoring in a way that meant something specific, and I did not ask what, because I had heard 3 days of specific language, and I understood that some things would not be named, even when people were looking directly at them. I flew home from Kiev on a Tuesday, watched Ukraine shrink below the clouds. The soil jar was in my carry-on, wrapped in a t-shirt. I tried to vlog when I got home. Opened my laptop, loaded the cabin footage. I opened the first file. Every frame had figures in it, not replacing my footage. Mine was there, the espresso machine, the rule book on the counter, the deck railing, but present alongside it, in the background of every shot where the light was low, at the windows, in the reflective surfaces. Figures watching. Present in every frame the way background noise is present in audio. You don't notice it until you listen for it, and once you notice it, you can never not notice it again. I deleted the channel. All of it. The Chernobyl content, the previous videos, the subscriber count. 4 minutes, and it was done. I closed the laptop and sat at my kitchen table and looked at the wall. I got a job. Data entry, quiet office, regular hours. I called my mother on Sundays. She asked about the trip, and I said I'd come back early. I was done with extreme content. She said she was glad. I didn't tell her what I'd seen. I didn't think I could give her that and have it be a kindness. The nights were harder. Reflections moved wrong in certain lights. Not always, not reliably, but sometimes, in the bathroom mirror's edge through the cloth I'd hung over it, in the black face of my switched-off laptop, in windows when the inside light was on and the street was dark outside. My own face in the glass with the slight, almost imperceptible quality of something performing itself rather than being itself. I had been learning not to look since Pripyat, and I got better at it every day. 3 months after I came home, on a night in January, with snow outside the window I was not looking at, someone knocked on my door. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 knocks. A child's voice, clear through the door. "Mark, we found you. Open up. It's your turn to hide." I was on the sofa. I set my phone face down and placed my hands flat on my knees, and I did not move, and I did not breathe, and I thought about the rule book. Do not move. Do not breathe. Do not make a sound. They will wait until 3 a.m. At 3 a.m., they will leave. They always leave at 3 a.m. The knocking continued, never frantic, patient, and certain, something with all the time available to it. At 3 a.m., it stopped. I sat until 3:30, made coffee, waited. At 5 a.m., I went to the window. On the glass. The outside of my 3rd-floor window on a city street with no balcony, no ledge, no way for any person to reach. A handprint. Small, child-sized, pressed flat against the glass from outside. I stood and looked at it for a long time. Then I got the rule book from the drawer where I'd been keeping it, and I read Rule 4 again, and I understood that the rules had not ended in Pripyat. They had followed me home. The zone knew where I was. Yulia had said so at the checkpoint, and I had nodded and thought she meant something metaphorical. She had not. I called her number, just to hear her voice. It rang twice, then voicemail. "You have reached Yulia. If you're calling, you survived. Congratulations. But they'll always know where you are now. The zone doesn't let go, it just waits. I'm still driving, still rescuing, still losing some. Follow the rules, even at home, especially at home. Goodbye, Mark." I listened 3 times. On the 4th try, the call disconnected. Number not in service. My recent calls showed unknown. The voicemail inbox was empty. I still have the soil. The jar sits on my nightstand. Black soil from the zone, coarse and dense behind the wax-sealed glass. I reach for it the way you reach for a phone. Some nights it's warm, not room temperature, but warm the way something is warm when heat comes from inside it rather than the air around it. On those nights I sit with the lights on and wait for morning with the jar in my lap, and in the morning it's cold again and I go to work. Some nights it whispers. I don't listen. I don't look at reflections after dark. I don't answer knocks. I follow the rules. Even here. Especially here. The zone is inside me now. It's in the soil, in the quiet moments when I almost forget. I never forget. That's the rule. That's the only rule that matters now. Remember. Always remember. Because if I forget, they'll remind me. And their reminders last forever. Sometimes I wonder if Lev is still waving, still smiling, still waiting on that roof. I think he is. I think he'll always be there. And I think the real Lev, the one who survived the first time, who watched Dmitri walk into the trees and didn't follow. I think he tried to tell me something in that last frame. I think that was him in the glass, using the only thing still available to him. I think what he was saying was, "You saw it, now you know. Follow the rules." And somewhere in Pripyat, in a cabin with heated floors and a fully stocked kitchen and a panoramic view of a city that has been dead for 40 years, the basement door is rattling. 3 padlocks, 3 knocks, 3 chances to answer. The next guest won't have Yulia's number. The next guest won't have the rules. The next guest won't last the night. But that's not my problem anymore. I'm home. I'm safe. I'm following the rules. And I never, ever look at the windows after dark. The car died at 6:47 in the evening, not a dramatic death, no grinding metal, no smoke from under the hood, just a soft, mechanical sigh, like the engine had made a decision, and then the road ahead was lit only by momentum and the last of the October light bleeding out behind the tree line. I coasted to the gravel shoulder, put it in park, and sat there with my hands on the wheel and the particular quiet of a highway that hasn't had traffic in 40 minutes pressing in through the windows. I tried the ignition 3 times, got nothing each time, not even a click. I looked at my phone. 1 bar, the kind that disappears when you look directly at it. I'd been on the road for 4 hours, the last 40 minutes of which had been a 2-lane state highway running through nothing but pine and the occasional rusted mailbox, suggesting someone, somewhere, had once thought this was a good place to live. I was supposed to arrive at the lodge by 7. I got out and stood in the cold and looked at the engine the way men do when they know nothing about engines, hood up, hands on hips, and waited. I was still waiting when headlights swung across me from behind. A dark blue sedan pulled to the shoulder and stopped, and the man who got out was in his mid-40s, wearing a collared shirt and slacks that were too pressed for the middle of the woods at dusk. He walked toward me with measured steps, hands in his pockets. "Mr. Calloway." Not a question. "Yeah, you must be Paul." Paul Fitzgerald shook my hand once, brief and firm. "I am." "Car trouble?" "Dead. Won't turn over." He looked at the engine, nodded once like he'd confirmed something, and turned back to his sedan. "I'll arrange a tow in the morning. Come, I'd like to be back before dark." He said it the way you'd say something unremarkable. But the way he turned, quick, no lingering, made something in the back of my skull take note. I grabbed my bag and got in. Paul drove the way some people pray, steady hands, focused eyes, with the air of someone who understood exactly how bad things could get if the ritual was broken. The lodge was 12 minutes up the road, but he didn't use that time for small talk. He used it for something else. "There's a physical copy of the operational guidelines in the welcome packet at the front desk," he said, about 2 minutes in. "I want to walk you through them verbally before we arrive." "Operational guidelines," I repeated, "for a night watchman job. Lodge caretaker position." He said it like there was a meaningful difference. The first guideline, lodge doors remain locked from sunset to sunrise. No exceptions. Front door, rear door, the utility entrance on the north side. All locked before dark. You check them yourself every night. "Understood," I said, because he'd paused in a way that expected it. Second, do not respond to knocking, calling, or any sounds from outside during night hours. Not verbally, not by going to the door. Silence. I waited for context. He didn't offer any. Third, if any person appears to be injured or in distress outside the lodge during night hours, do not provide assistance. Contact me on the number in the packet and wait until morning. The pine trees ran past in the headlights. The sky above the road had gone from gray-blue to deep purple. "That one needs explaining," I said. "It will." His knuckles flexed on the wheel. Fourth, basement access is restricted. The door stays locked at all times. The key is in the welcome packet. It stays in the packet. Fifth, kitchen windows are covered before dark. Heavy curtains already in place. Sixth, do not use the radio after 10 p.m., off at 10, and it stays off. I almost asked about the radio, but something in his voice made me hold off. Seventh, do not shine lights toward the tree line. The external floods face the porch and parking area. They don't face the woods. He paused. Eighth, the storage closet off the main hallway contains personal items belonging to previous lodge employees. Those items are not to be disturbed, moved, or removed. The closet stays closed. The car slowed. I looked up and saw the lodge through the trees, a low, wide building set back from the road, built from timber and pale river stone, with a covered porch running the full length of the front. Lights were on inside, warm and amber behind heavy curtains. It should have looked welcoming. It didn't. Paul parked and turned the engine off but didn't get out. He sat with both hands still on the wheel. His knuckles were white. I noticed it clearly for the first time and tried not to keep looking at them. "The last guy," he said. I waited. "Marcus, he was here for about 3 weeks. Careful at first." Paul's voice was flat, uninflected, like he was reading from a report. He said he thought he recognized a face, someone he knew, standing outside at night. He said he couldn't just leave someone out there in the cold. He stopped. He opened the door. "What happened to him?" Paul looked at the lodge. The amber light moved slightly behind the curtain, like something had passed between the lamp and the window. "He wasn't a good fit after that," Paul said, and got out. Inside, the lodge was larger than it looked from the road. A main hall ran the full depth of the building, opening into a sitting room with a stone fireplace. There was a front desk with a manila envelope on it, my name written in pen on the front, and off the main hall, a kitchen, a small office with a radio set and security monitors, a storage room, and a staircase to my quarters above. Paul moved through the space with the confidence of someone who had memorized every inch and wanted to be done with it. He showed me the 3 door locks, heavy deadbolts. He showed me the kitchen curtains and demonstrated their overlap. He pointed at the clock above the radio. 10 o'clock, he said. Off. "I heard you." "You'd be surprised," he said without inflection, "how many people say that." He walked me to the storage closet last. Plain wooden door, simple lever handle. He stood in front of it without touching the handle. "Previous occupants," he said. "Several of them. Nobody came for their things, and we don't remove them." He looked at me. "Don't open this door, Mr. Calloway." He left at 7:42. I watched his taillights disappear around the first bend in the trees. Then I was alone in the lodge with the amber light and the heavy curtains and the wind working at the eaves. I stood on the porch for 30 seconds, looking out at the parking area and the dark tree line beyond it. Then I went inside and locked the door. I read the guidelines in full at 8:15, sitting at the front desk with a cup of instant coffee that tasted like warm, dark water. The booklet was 8 pages, spiral-bound, with a lodge operational guidelines header and a space for an employee name. Someone had printed Calloway, R, in block letters and written the date. I read it twice. Each rule was the same as Paul had said it, with brief explanatory paragraphs that explained procedure without explaining reason. Rule 3 told me to call Paul if I saw someone in distress outside. It did not tell me why I shouldn't help them myself. Rule 4 told me the basement key was in the envelope. I checked. It was there, small, plain, labeled with a piece of tape. I put it back. Rules 5 through 8 were shorter. Cover the kitchen windows. Radio off at 10. No lights toward the trees. Don't touch the closet. The journalist in me, the part that had run investigative pieces for 2.5 years before everything went sideways, started connecting things. 8 rules. Previous employees. Paul's face when he mentioned Marcus. A storage closet full of belongings nobody had collected. I tilted the booklet toward the lamp. Below where Calloway, R, had been printed, there was a faint impression in the paper, like the previous sheet had been written on while sitting on top of this one. I tilted it until I could read the impression. Marcus, D. I set the booklet down. I checked the kitchen curtains at 9. Both windows, floor-length curtains pulled shut and overlapped exactly how Paul had shown me. I checked the 3 door locks. All solid. I turned the radio off at 10 exactly. It had been playing a country station, something with a lot of open space in the melody. The silence it left felt different from regular silence. I went up to my room at 11. I lay on my back and stared at the ceiling and thought about my car on the shoulder of the highway, and about Marcus D., and about Paul's knuckles, and about 8 rules that I had mostly decided were excessive liability documentation for a remote property. I fell asleep thinking that. I woke up at 1:53 a.m., not thinking it at all. The pounding started suddenly, flat-handed impacts against the front door, the kind made by someone hitting it with urgency rather than knocking. I was up and moving before I was fully awake, and I was at the top of the staircase by the time I understood what I was hearing. Then the voice. "Hello? Is someone there? Please, I'm hurt, please." A woman. High and cracked, the quality of a voice that had been screaming and was now past the loudest part and into raw pleading. My hand found the stair rail. I went down in the dark and stopped in the main hall. Rule 2. I stood there and did not move. "Please," the voice fractured. "He's behind me, I can hear him. Please, you have to open the door." I moved to the front door. There was a peephole at eye level. I looked through it. She was on the porch under the amber porch light. A woman in her 40s, dressed in scrubs, white, or what had been white. There was blood on her sleeve and a tear at the shoulder. Her hair was half loose, strands sticking to her face. She had her hands pressed together near her chest, and her eyes were moving left and right with the frantic, unfocused scan of genuine panic. Medical scrubs, that posture, the way she held herself even in distress with a kind of trained uprightness. A nurse, maybe. Someone from the nearby town Paul had mentioned. My hand moved to the deadbolt before I noticed it moving. Rule 2. I pulled my hand back and kept looking. She slammed both palms against the door. "Please, let me in!" I stayed still. My heart was very loud in the quiet hallway. I kept my eye at the peephole. I didn't make a sound. She pressed her forehead to the door, both hands flat on it, and went still. The desperate energy drained out of her all at once, like a switch had been thrown. Then she stepped back. 1 step, 2. She moved to the center of the porch and faced the door again, and in the amber porch light I watched her face change, not dramatically, not all at once, but in the way a shape resolves when you look at it from the right angle. The panic was gone. What replaced it was something harder to name. Patient, attentive. She was looking directly at the peephole, not at the door, at the peephole, at the exact small circle of glass where my eye was, behind a solid wooden door, in a dark hallway I hadn't turned a light on in. She smiled. It started as a normal smile. Then it continued past the point where a normal smile stops. The corners of her mouth moved out and up and kept moving, creasing her cheeks past where skin and muscle should have resisted the motion, until the smile occupied too much of the lower half of her face. Her eyes stayed level the whole time, watching the peephole, watching me. I stepped back and hit the hallway wall. I hadn't meant to move. Her voice came through the door, quieter now. The cracked urgency was gone. In its place, something flat and resonant, like a voice recorded and played back with some of the frequency stripped out, hollow, slightly too even. "That's right," she said. I did not breathe. "Follow the rules." A pause, the same hollow quality. "For now." Through the peephole, she stood there a moment longer with the smile still in place. Then she turned. She walked down the porch steps and across the parking area, and I watched her until the tree line took her. Her gait was almost right. Almost. The weight shifted a beat late on each step, the knees hinging with a small delay, like she was operating from a distance and the signal had a lag. Then the trees were just trees, and the parking area was empty. I stayed with my back against the hallway wall for a long time. My heart was doing something unsteady and insistent. The lodge was completely quiet around me. I kept coming back to the same thing. Not the smile, not the voice. The fact that she'd known where to look, behind a solid door, in a dark hallway, at a small circle of glass a centimeter across. She'd known exactly where my eye was. She'd been watching me watch her, And she had said, "For now." I did not go back to bed. I sat in the office with the security monitors until the cameras showed gray sky instead of black, and when there was enough light to mean morning, I picked up the booklet from the desk and read the 8 rules a third time. They didn't seem paranoid anymore. Morning came in through the office windows in thin gray lines, the kind that doesn't so much arrive as accumulate. I'd been in the office chair for 3 hours watching the monitors cycle through their 4 angles: parking area, front porch, back porch, tree line east, and finding nothing on any of them, just gravel and boards and pine and the dark giving way gradually to something slightly less dark. At some point, the tree line camera went from black to the color of old pewter, and I decided that was enough. I got up, went to the kitchen, made instant coffee, and stood at the counter thinking about what I'd seen through the peephole at 1:53 in the morning. The smile that had gone past where smiles stop. The voice flat and hollow. The way she'd looked directly at the peephole without any hesitation, like she'd known exactly where my eye was. That's right. Follow the rules. For now. I turned the thought over the way I used to turn a lead over in my early days at the paper, before I learned that the thing at the bottom of a story is rarely the thing you wanted to find. There had to be a rational explanation, a prank, a disturbed local, someone who'd heard about the lodge and decided to test the new arrival. The smile, though, the smile kept getting in the way. I called Paul at 7:45. "There was a woman outside last night," I said. "Around 2 a.m. scrubs, dark hair, torn shoulder, blood on the sleeve. She was asking to be let in." A pause. "Did you open the door?" "No." "Respond verbally in any way?" "No." Longer pause. "Good." He said it the way you'd say something fundamentally necessary. "Sounds like Catherine Marsh, the clinic on Route 9. What you saw was not Catherine Marsh, but I'd recommend you drive into town today. See the real Catherine. It helps to see a real face after a night like that." He paused. "Your car should be at the garage by noon." He hung up before I could ask anything else. I took the lodge's gray pickup in. The drive was 20 minutes of highway and pine, and in the daylight, the road looked entirely ordinary, except for the knowledge I was carrying. The town was small. One main road, a gas station, a post office, a diner, and the clinic with its blue sign, Marsh Family Health. I parked and sat in the truck a moment before getting out, just looking at the street. The people were off. Not wrong like the thing at my door. Not that kind, but quieter. A man crossing the road clocked the lodge truck, and his pace shortened slightly, the adjustment of someone who'd recognized what it meant. A woman coming out of the post office looked at me and deliberately looked away, the practiced non-look of someone who didn't want questions. I knew that look. I'd spent 2.5 years making people wear it. The clinic waiting room was empty, except for a young man staring at his phone. 5 minutes after I sat down, a woman in her 40s came out from the back in clean white scrubs and stopped when she saw me. Same face as what I'd seen through the peephole. Same dark hair and general architecture, but everything else was different. The posture, the quality of attention, the eyes. Direct, present, assessing. A person behind them. "You're from the lodge," she said. "Randy Calloway, started last night." "Catherine Marsh." She shook my hand. "You look like you didn't sleep." "I didn't." She nodded like that was the correct answer. "Come back for a minute." Her office was small and organized. She sat at her desk and got straight to it. "It used my face," she said. Not a question. "The uniform, the face, you were there, except you weren't. It does that." She'd said it before. The delivery was flat and practiced. Uses whoever the new person would most likely open a door for. With Marcus, it started with his sister. "I'm the nurse. People open doors for nurses." She paused. "It learns what works." "You know what it is," I said. "Everyone here does. Nobody talks about it much because talking doesn't change it." She set down her pen. What changes it is not going out alone after dark, not opening your door to familiar faces at night, and keeping the lodge job filled. I caught the edge in that. Paul knows what he's sending people into. Yes. Flat, no apology. Does that change anything for you? I thought about my empty bank account, about my last article, about arriving at my mother's hospital room 40 minutes too late with a press badge still around my neck. Not right now, I said. She held whatever opinion she had behind her clinical distance. Then, follow the rules. All 8, every night. I was heading back to the truck when I passed the general store. A young woman was behind the counter, 20-something, close-cropped hair, the vigilance of someone who has grown up knowing there is genuinely something dangerous in the dark. She saw me and something in her expression sharpened. I went in. There was a box cutter on the counter. She set it down with deliberate casualness. "You're the new one at the lodge," she said. "Word gets around." "Only word worth getting around here." She glanced out at the street. "Did it come last night?" "Yeah." "Catherine's face?" "Yeah." She exhaled. "I'm Lily. My family's been here a long time." Simple. Factual. The long-timers know the patterns. It always starts with someone local, someone the new person would trust. Then it escalates. She held eye contact. "Don't go out at night, and don't trust anyone who comes to that door after dark, not even if they look like me." The box cutter sat between us, not an accident. "What does escalating mean?" I asked. She scored tape on a cardboard box, short strokes. "It learns you," she said, not looking up. "At some point it stops using strangers." A pause. "It starts using people you actually lost." I drove back to the lodge and did not turn on the radio. The afternoon was quiet in a way that felt deliberately misleading. I collected my car from the garage, new starter, $200 I hadn't planned for, closed the kitchen curtains at 5, checked all 3 door locks at 8, turned the radio off at 10 exactly, went upstairs at 11 and lay on my back in the dark. It came at midnight. No pounding, no performance. Just my mother's voice outside my bedroom window, quiet and specific the way only a voice you've known your whole life can be. "Randy? Mijo? It's so cold out here." My chest did something involuntary. I knew what this was. Paul had named it on the drive. Catherine had confirmed it. Lily had practically diagrammed it. And still I lay there with the sheets bunched in my hands, because it was her voice. Her exact voice. The slightly raised pitch at the end of her sentences, the particular way she held my name. And my mother had been dead for 8 months, and I had not been in the room when she died. "Why won't you let me in?" Rule 2. I pressed my back against the headboard. I said nothing. The pause after was too long. Same lag as the nurse mimic, the beat-and-a-half gap between statements, as if something was waiting for a response before cueing the next line. "I know you were working," the voice said. "I know you couldn't get there. I'm not angry with you, mijo." It knew. That was the thing sitting cold in my chest. It knew about the hospital, about the timing, about the press badge still around my neck when I walked into that room. Either it had watched from the tree line long enough to piece something together, or, and this was the thought I wouldn't let myself finish, it had gotten these details from somewhere else, from something it had already drunk. Then my father's voice, even, quiet, the specific tone of a man who expressed disappointment through calm observation rather than volume. My father had been dead 4 years. I had given his eulogy. I knew exactly what that wound felt like, and hearing his voice from outside a window at midnight was a different kind of horrible from the fear the nurse mimic had given me, less immediate, and somehow worse for that. "Son, be reasonable. She's asking for you. Just open the window. You don't have to step outside." Then Sarah, not pleading, not gentle, angry with the precision of someone who knows which words land and where. "You're hiding again. You've always done this. That's what this whole thing is, isn't it? A new place to disappear. The too long pause. I see you, Randy, even when you hide. She had said those exact words to me once, in my kitchen, during the last real argument before the end of Us. I hadn't revisited that specific phrasing in a long time, had let it settle under other things, the way you do when direct processing costs too much. Hearing it from outside the window produced a cold, targeted horror that went further in than the nurse mimic had managed. That had been immediate and physical. This was something else. The three cycled for 2 hours. My mother, my father, Sarah, taking turns, overlapping occasionally in a way that broke the illusion for a moment. 3 voices from the same still point outside my window, pauses syncing up between them, exposing the single source behind all 3 performances. At 2 a.m, the voices stopped. The silence had a particular weight to it, the weight of something finished rather than something gone. I waited 20 minutes, then went downstairs to the office because sitting in that room was no longer something I could do. The logbook was on the shelf above the security monitors, a composition book with a handwritten label, Lodge Log. I pulled it down and opened it. Paul's entries first, dated, brief, administrative. Date, weather, nothing to report. Occasionally, sounds from North Perimeter, rules observed. Further back, different handwriting. Then another. 3 years of rotations, each in its own hand. The entries growing sparser and shorter as each occupancy went on. Marcus started halfway through. His early entries were normal. By the 4th night, voices outside. Didn't respond, rules holding. A week later, getting more accurate. Heard my sister tonight. Not her, cadence is wrong, but close. Then, saw my own face in the window, just standing there, smiling. Don't know what that means yet. The final entry was the same hand but coming apart, the letters unraveling, the pen pressure uneven, the line of writing tilting off the horizontal. It was wearing my face. It was wearing my face and smiling at me, and I could tell by the way it smiled, too far back, but it sounded like me. It knows things I haven't told anyone. I have to remember I'm me. I have to remember I'm... The next page was blank. I sat with the logbook in my lap and looked at the monitors. Parking area, empty. Front porch, empty. Back porch, empty. Tree line east. I leaned toward the screen. At the boundary where lodge property ended and forest began, a figure was standing, perfectly still, that same specific quality of stillness from the nurse mimic, not resting, not waiting. Paused. I looked at it for a long moment before I understood what I was seeing. It was wearing my face. Even on the grainy gray monitor feed, the proportions were clear. My height, my build, my jacket. The same jacket I'd been wearing when Paul found me on the highway shoulder. Standing at the tree line, facing the cameras, facing me. Slowly, it raised one hand. A small, casual wave, the gesture of flagging down a friend. Its smile stretched too wide, past the edges of its face, into something that was no longer a smile. It took one step toward the lodge, just one, deliberate and unhurried. Then it stopped, tilted its head, my head, at an angle I had never tilted mine, and stood there. I set the logbook down on the desk. My hands were steady, which surprised me. I thought about Marcus's handwriting coming apart at the end of the page. I thought about Lily's box cutter on the counter. I thought about Catherine saying in her level voice, "It'll start using people you actually lost." I had not known, until that moment, that it could also use me. The self-mimic was still at the tree line when I finally stopped watching the monitor and went to bed. I don't know when it left. I fell asleep in the office chair sometime after 3 a.m, the logbook still in my lap, and when I woke with my neck stiff and pale morning light coming through the office blinds, The tree-lined camera showed nothing but pine and frost-pale grass. No figure, nobody wearing my face. I made coffee and stood at the kitchen counter thinking about Marcus's final entry. The handwriting coming apart. The letters losing their hold on the horizontal. I have to remember I'm me. I have to remember I'm. I understood now, standing in the kitchen in the gray morning light, why it had ended exactly there. The third night, the self-mimic didn't stand at the tree line. It came to just beyond the porch, close enough that if the porch light had reached further, I might have seen it from a window. I heard it around 11, shortly after I'd turned off the bedroom light, a voice from below the window, not shouting, not pleading, just talking. My voice, my exact voice, with the specific wrongness a recording of yourself has, the quality you can't quite name until you hear it, and then can't unhear it. You came here to disappear, it said. That's what this is. A job nobody else wanted. A place nobody drives to on purpose. Somewhere to be nobody for a while and let everything else get far enough away that it stops feeling immediate. I lay on my back in the dark and did not move. I get it. I'm you. I know how tired you are. Rule 2. I pressed both hands flat against the mattress and stared up at the ceiling and thought about the logbook, about Marcus, about how the handwriting had been clear and organized at the beginning and had come apart at the end. I counted the days between his first entry and his last. 17 days. You don't have to say anything, the voice said. I just wanted you to know I understand. That's all. Then it went quiet. Not the abrupt switching off of the nurse mimic's performance. This was slower, like a tide receding rather than a switch being thrown. I lay still for another hour before my eyes closed. It came back the fourth night, and the fifth, and the sixth. Each night it was a little more accurate. The rhythm of my speech, the way I pause before certain kinds of sentences, the specific habits of my voice that I hadn't known I had until I heard them coming from outside a wall at midnight. By the sixth night, listening to it was like hearing a recording of a phone call you hadn't known was being made. You left the paper because the story you published was right, it said on the sixth night, from just beyond the window. That's why it ruined you. They couldn't attack the story, so they attacked you, and you let them. Because somewhere in the back of your head you'd already decided you deserved to be attacked. I had pulled the pillow over my face. The words came through anyway. Your mother dying while you were at a press briefing wasn't punishment for anything. You know that. But you've been treating it like it was, because guilt is easier to live with than plain grief. Guilt at least gives you something to do, something to atone for. Grief is just empty. My hands were shaking, not from fear, something less immediate than fear, something that went further in. I lay there with the pillow pressed over my face and felt the specific and horrible intimacy of being seen clearly by something that wanted to use the seeing. Maybe you're already me, it said, quieter now, almost conversational. Maybe the real Randy left a long time ago, a little at a time, and what's lying in that bed right now is just the habit of him, the shape he left in the air when he walked out. I got up, went to the bathroom, ran cold water over both hands, and stood at the mirror. My face looked back. My face, not a copy. I looked at it for a long time, longer than was normal, confirming it the way you confirm your wallet is in your pocket after someone mentions pickpockets. My face, still mine. I went back to bed and did not sleep until almost 4. By the 7th day, I had been writing things down on a notepad for 2 days, though I only understood why I'd started doing it on the 7th day. My name at the top, my age, the city I was from, where I'd gone to school. My mother's name, Elena, the color of my first car, A dark green Honda with a dent in the rear bumper from a parking garage in my second year at UMD that I'd never gotten fixed. My best story. The one that had cost me my job. The names of the 3 people it had helped. Small things. Specific things. Mine. I brought the notepad with me wherever I went in the lodge. I didn't examine that habit too closely. The scratching started on the 7th night, a little after 1 in the morning. I was downstairs in the office. Sleep had been ragged enough that going upstairs felt more like a gesture than a plan, and I heard it through the floor. Under me. A low rhythmic sound, like something dragging fingernails slowly across stone. Patient and persistent, the cadence of something that was tired but had decided to keep going anyway. I sat very still at the desk. The basement. The door in the main hall that I walked past 12 times a day. The key in the welcome packet in the desk drawer that I had confirmed the first night and left alone since. The scratching continued for several minutes, unhurried. Then it stopped. Then the voice came. My voice. But not the polished outside version that had been calibrating itself all week. This was rougher, quieter. It had the texture of someone who had been awake too long and was running low on what it takes to keep your voice level. Randy. I gripped the edge of the desk. Randy, it's me. I know how that sounds. I know. But it put me down here. And I can't. A pause. The sound of breath caught and released. The basement is safe. The stone does something. It can't reach me here. Please. The key is in the desk drawer. Just the key. Just open the door and I'll come up and you'll see. My hand moved to the desk drawer before I registered it moving. Rule 4. Basement level access is restricted. The door remains locked at all times. I looked at my hand on the drawer. I looked at the floor. The scratching had gone quiet the moment I'd shifted in the chair, as if something had been tracking the sound of my weight changing. Randy? The voice had dropped lower, winded, the way a voice gets when everything else has been spent. Please, ask me something. Anything only the real me would know. I'll answer it. I'll prove it. I sat there with my hand on the drawer and thought about Marcus, about 17 days, about the final entry with the letters tilting off their line, about the blank page after. Marcus had opened a door. I took my hand off the drawer. The scratching started up again, slower this time, like something settling in for the long version. I sat with it for another 2 hours. I read the notepad. Elena. Dark green Honda. 3 people helped by the best story I ever ran. I read it twice and then added things I'd left out. The specific street in Baltimore I'd grown up on. My father's middle name. The name of the first editor who'd believed I could actually do the job. At 3:30, the voice came back and something about it had changed. I know you're not going to open it, it said. No pleading, no urgency. Just the observation, stated plainly. You're too careful. You read those rules 3 times before you went to sleep on the first night. A pause. I just want you to know, whatever happens, I was real. I was actually there, inside, and you're going to forget that, and that's okay. But I wanted someone to know. It sat there like a plain fact, not a lever trying to move something. Just a statement. And the worst part was that it did something to me anyway. Not by making me want to open the door, but by making me aware of how much I wanted there to be someone down there who was real, and how that wanting was the exact shape of the trap. I sat with it until 4 in the morning. Then I took the key out of the welcome packet. I held it in my hand and looked at it for a long time. And I walked to the basement door. I told myself I was checking. The journalist reflex. The flaw that had cost me my career and also once produced the story that mattered most. The compulsion to not assume, to look, to know, rather than believe. I told myself that restricted didn't mean forbidden, that I wasn't going in to help a person. I was going in to confirm there was no person. I put the key in the lock and turned it. The stairs went down into cold stone smell and the gray of a single bare bulb that came on when I found the switch. Low ceiling, rough stone walls. The original root cellar, older than the lodge built on top of it, older than most things in this part of the county. Empty. No person. No mimic. No scratching. Just the walls. I walked to the nearest wall and looked at what was on it. Names. Carved into the stone with something sharp. Some of them fresh, pale at the cuts, some worn nearly smooth. They covered all 3 visible walls from about knee height to above my head, names and years, some with a dash and a second year after, some with only the first. Dozens, going back to dates I hadn't expected. I found Marcus D near the middle of the far wall. The letters uneven, made quickly or in bad light or by hands that weren't steady. On a wooden crate in the center of the room sat a thick binder, the cover water-stained and soft at the corners. Faded marker on the front. Containment protocols. What works? I sat down on the cold floor and opened it. Different handwriting on different paper, assembled over what looked like decades. The early pages explained the site. A trapper. The early 1900s. A severe winter. Survival by means the writers described around the edges rather than directly. The kind of careful language that means the actual thing is too specific and too bad to write plainly. He had survived. He had come back wrong. Hollow. Needing something no living person needs in the way he needed it. The lodge had been built on the cabin's foundation later. The builders hadn't known. The people who came after did. Then the mechanics of the rules. What each one actually cost the entity when held. Rule 2. The silence. Not just the sound of a voice, but something beyond it. Some quality of personhood that comes through in language. The rules are not procedure, the binder said. They are a wall assembled from denial. Every rule kept is a course of brick in it. Every rule broken is a course removed. And then the page I read twice before the full meaning arrived. The basement cold spot disrupts the entity's sensory reach. It cannot read the occupant here. This is also why the voice from below is always a deception. The entity cannot enter the stone room, but it can project through the floor from outside. The voice calling from under the floor is the entity using your own voice as a key. There is no other version of you down there. There is only it. Breach of the basement threshold, even by the occupant alone, reduces the cold spot effect. The protection is diminished. Not completely, not at once, but measurably and permanently. You will have given it something it could not take. The scratching had stopped the moment I opened the door, because it didn't need to scratch anymore. I sat on the stone floor for a while because there was no urgency in moving quickly now. What had been done was done. I read several more pages. More names, more notes from people who had sat in this same room and understood what the understanding had cost them. And then I closed the binder, set it back on the crate, and went upstairs. Every monitor showed the same image. All 4 feeds. Parking area, front porch, back porch, tree line east. The same figure on the front porch in the dark. Tall. The limbs too long at the joints. The shoulders at a slightly wrong angle. Skin the color of ash pulled tight. It was standing completely still, facing the window, and where its face should have been there was a smooth, concave depression, like someone had pressed a thumb into wet clay a long time ago, and the clay had hardened that way. No skin over it, no performance, no voice calling from outside, no smile stretching too wide. Just the thing itself, standing on the front porch and pressing that void where a face should be against the window glass. It wasn't knocking. It wasn't asking. It had always been waiting. Now it was waiting in a slightly better position. I looked at all 4 feeds cycling through the same motionless figure, and I picked up the notepad from the desk and held it in both hands. Randy Calloway. Elena. Dark green Honda. Dent in the rear bumper. 3 people helped. A street in Baltimore. My father's middle name was George. Still mine. All of it still mine. I kept the notepad in my hands and watched the monitors and waited for morning. The thing on the porch didn't move. I sat in the office chair with the notepad in my hands and watched it on all 4 monitors. It just stood there, pressing that blank concave depression against the window glass, and the longer it stood, the more I understood that standing was the point. It wasn't waiting for an opening. The standing was the attack. I felt the pull about 20 minutes in, slow at the edges of things, like a loose thread in fabric being drawn out quietly. Not painful, not dramatic. Just a gradual sense of things becoming less fixed than they had been. I looked at the notepad. Elena, my mother's name. The word was right, but the texture behind it, the specific weight her name carried in memory, had thinned from when I'd written it an hour ago. I went to the kitchen, made coffee I didn't drink, stood at the covered window with the mug in both hands. It's pulling at me right now, I thought. Through the walls, slow and patient. The way you'd draw water out of wood just by holding it near a flame long enough. I went back to the desk and added more to the notepad. The joke I told at 10 that made my mother laugh, the real laugh, the kind that came before she decided something was funny. I wrote the most specific version I could find. The way her shoulders came up, the way her whole face changed. Read it back. The weight returned a little. The figure on the porch had not moved. By 2 a.m, I had 3 pages filled. The smell of my father's car, old leather, and a pine-shaped air freshener on the dash. The brand of instant coffee my mother kept above the stove. The first sentence of the article that ended my career at the Courier. I could still recite it word for word. My street growing up, Garland Avenue. The color of our front door, red, which my mother had painted herself one Saturday in May, and which the landlord had made her repaint white when they moved 6 months later. She'd muttered about that door for a week. Specific things, mine alone. The pull kept coming. Occasionally, I would write something and read it back, and the feeling behind the word would have thinned again. I would close my eyes and try to reach the original, and sometimes it was there, and sometimes only the word remained, standing like an empty room where furniture used to be. The edges of the room were doing things in my peripheral vision, shadows that moved slightly wrong, seeming to breathe when I wasn't looking directly at them. I understood what was happening. The binder had explained the mechanics. The notepad was the wall. Every time I read it, every time I reached back and found the real thing behind the word, I was relaying a course of brick. And every time I failed to reach it, a course came out. Sometime around 3, I understood that falling asleep would be the end. Not because of what I'd do while sleeping. I wouldn't open a door in my sleep. But the pulling didn't stop for sleep. It would continue without the reading, without the maintenance, and by morning, whatever was in the bed wouldn't be the same configuration as what had lain down. I would wake up with my face and my name and not know what was missing, and that was the worst version I could imagine. I walked slow circles around the office, read the notepad front to back, walked again. At 4 a.m, the radio crackled. Rule 6, no radio after 10 p.m. It was 6 hours past that. I knew what the radio could do. The booklet had said it on night 1, and the binder had confirmed it. The hollow man can mimic radio frequencies. But the voice that came through belonged to Paul. Randy. Formal, slightly clipped. The particular flatness of a man who had learned to keep everything at careful administrative distance. I did not touch the dial. I sat and looked at the radio. "I know you're not going to pick up," the voice said. "That's fine. Just listen." A pause. "You went to the basement." Not a question. "I did too," Paul said. 12 years ago. First week. Everyone does. The curiosity doesn't go away just because you've read about what it costs. A pause. "I'm sorry I didn't make that part clearer to you." The figure on the porch monitors had not moved. "The rules tell you what not to do," he said. "They don't tell you that the need to understand is itself part of what it feeds on. Your curiosity is fuel for it. Your guilt. Your loneliness. Everything that makes you the particular person you are, that's material to it, not metaphor. That is what is happening to you right now, through those walls, in real time." His voice had worn thinner while he talked, the administrative distance harder to maintain than at the start. "I'm not a handler," he said. "There is no company. There is just me and the people before me, and the arrangement this town has been running for a very long time. The lodge exists to keep it fed enough that it doesn't go into town. Each occupant gives it something, fear mostly. The particular flavor of a person being slowly consumed without fully knowing what is consuming them. Most people break a rule inside the first 3 weeks. Then the feeding accelerates and it is over. You are on day 8. You have gone further than most." A long pause. "It is feeding on you right now. Your fear, your guilt, the specific weight of what happened with your mother. That is what it eats. You cannot fight it physically. There is nothing to fight that way. But you can control what it consumes. Give it something it cannot use. Something clean. It cannot digest warmth. It has never been able to. It has only ever eaten the bitter things. Fear, regret, loneliness. Give it something that is none of those." The radio went quiet. I picked up the handset. "How do you know?" "Because I tried it once, 12 years ago, same night, same porch. I pushed something at it. Something I thought was clean. It pulled back." His voice was careful and exact. "It recovered. I didn't hold the thing long enough or with enough substance behind it. But it pulled back. I've spent 12 years trying to understand what I did and why it wasn't enough to finish it." A pause. "You're better at finding the truth in things than I was. Use that." "You send people here knowing they'll be taken," I said. The silence ran long enough that I thought the connection had gone. "Yes," he said, flat. No apology in it. "I do. I have made peace with what that is. I am not asking you to make the same peace." A pause. "I am asking you to survive the next 2 hours." The radio clicked off. I sat with the handset in my hand and then set it down. The notepad was facts, specific and accurate, a rope I'd been grabbing to stay in place all night. But facts weren't warmth. Facts were the word, not the feeling behind it. I moved the chair to the center of the room, away from the desk and the monitors, sat on the floor, closed my eyes. The pull was still there, patient, steady, working past the words toward the feelings behind them, trying to peel the warmth out from under the memory and leave the facts standing hollow. I went looking for something it couldn't hollow. Not the hospital. Not the press badge around my neck when I'd walked into that room. Not the article, or the career ending, or the months of nothing that came after. Not Sarah. Not any of the weight I'd been carrying since well before the highway shoulder where Paul had been standing. I went further back. I was 10 years old. My mother was in the kitchen making dinner. I'd come home from school with a joke I'd gotten from a kid named Marcus Briggs, who sat next to me in 4th grade. A stupid joke, the kind 10-year-olds trade like small currency. I'd told it while she was stirring something on the stove, and I'd delivered it badly, stumbled over the setup, got the punchline in the wrong order. She laughed anyway, not politely. The real kind. The kind that came out before she'd decided whether something was funny, that made her shoulders come up and her eyes close. She laughed at the bad delivery more than the joke itself. She said, "Randy, that was terrible," still laughing, and she pulled me into a side hug that smelled like the yellow dish soap she always kept by the sink. And for about 30 seconds, the kitchen had been the warmest room I'd ever been in. I held that. Not the words I'd just used to describe it. The thing itself. I held it the way you hold a hot mug in the cold, feeling the warmth come through the ceramic into your palms, and I kept holding it, and then I pushed it outward. Not toward the window. Not toward the porch. Just outward. The way you'd breathe out slow after holding your breath. The way you'd open your hands and let something go that you'd been gripping too hard. I pushed 30 seconds of warm kitchen out through the walls of the lodge. Something changed. No sound, no light. Just the pull going uneven, stuttering, the way an engine catches on something in the fuel and loses its steady rhythm. I held the memory harder. The dish soap smell. Her shoulders. Randy. That was terrible. The laugh still in her voice when she said it. The pull stuttered again. Then it recoiled. Not like a tide. Like a flinch. Something encountering a texture it didn't recognize and pulling back from the contact. On the monitor, the figure stepped back from the window. Then another step, jerky and uneven, too mechanical, joints out of sequence, the movement of something that learned to walk by watching rather than doing. Its arm came up, not a gesture, just part of the body moving away. I held the memory harder. The smallness of it. 30 seconds in a Baltimore kitchen that had no weight in the world except what I gave it, that nobody else alive remembered now, that existed because I was still here to carry it. The figure stepped back again, reached the porch steps, the gravel, the grass at the edge of the parking area. The edges of its form started to come apart. No collapse, no sound. Just the outline losing resolution, the way a shape looks at the limit of what a lens can hold. It backed into the tree line, and the trees closed over it. The monitors showed empty porch, empty grass. I sat on the floor with the notepad in my lap and a warm kitchen in my chest and breathed in and out until my hands stopped shaking. Paul arrived at first light. Same car, same pressed shirt and careful posture. He stood in the gravel a moment looking at the lodge, then came to the door and knocked twice. I let him in. He looked at all 4 monitors, empty angles, and then at me. The number he'd been running for 12 years had just come out wrong, and something in his face was adjusting to that. It pulled back, he said. Yeah, you fed it something clean. My mother laughing at a bad joke. I was 10. He was quiet for a moment. I tried something too. 12 years ago. Something gentle, I thought. Something I missed. He shook his head. Sad is still bitter to it. Sad is still what it eats. I called it clean, but it wasn't. He looked at the empty monitors. You used joy. Something with no bitterness in it at all. I don't think anyone has tried joy before. He looked at me with the same direct, measuring look I'd seen from Catherine and from Lily. The look of someone who has been surviving for a long time, doing a rapid and careful reassessment of something they thought they understood. You did something new, he said. You might have just written Rule 24. I looked out the open front door at the morning. Gray, cold, quiet. The pines standing exactly as they always had. I can leave, I said. Take the car. Find something else. Let whatever happens here keep happening. Yes, he said. You can. Or I can stay. Something moved in his face. Not pride, not relief, not guilt, but something with the shape of all 3 that wasn't quite any of them. If you stay, he said, you'd be the first person in this lodge who came back a second day with something it can't digest. That changes what the next person inherits. It changes what the rules say is possible. I looked at the logbook on the shelf above the monitors. Marcus D. carved into the basement wall below me, leaving a record the only way he'd been able to. I took the logbook off the shelf, opened it to the next blank page, picked up the pen that had been in the cup since the first night. I wrote, Day 1. I fed it something that made it sick. The rules still stand. But now we fight back. I set the pen down and looked at Paul. Show me what 12 years of this looks like, I said, so I can do it better. Just for a second, behind the careful distance that had lived permanently on his face since the first time I saw him, something moved aside. The look of a person who had been carrying something alone for a very long time and had not known they were still capable of not being alone. Then he straightened his collar in the small, precise habit I recognized from the car on the first night, and he pulled out the chair at the desk, and he sat down. "Coffee first," he said, "then everything I know that isn't in the booklet." Outside, through the kitchen window I still hadn't uncovered, the morning came through the pines in flat gray sheets. The tree line stood exactly where it always had. Somewhere behind it, the thing was doing whatever it did when it wasn't at the lodge. For now, just this morning, it wasn't at the lodge. That was enough. What's up, everyone? Quick favor before we start. If you like the stories, then please consider liking and subscribing to support the channel. If you're on mobile, then hit the hype feature. It massively boosts these stories to new listeners. Also, I'm curious where in the world you're tuning in from, so leave your location in the comments. All right, enough talk. Let's jump into tonight's tale. The call came on a Tuesday, which was unusual. Most people go missing on weekends. The voice on the phone was a woman's, polished and tight with the kind of panic that hasn't quite accepted it's real yet. She'd been holding herself together for 24 hours and the seams were showing, but just barely. Women like that. Money in the family 3 generations deep. Private schools, the practiced calm of people who solve problems by throwing resources at them. They don't break easily. They just get quieter and quieter until something gives all at once. "My daughter," she said. "She went into the glades yesterday. She hasn't come back." I was sitting on my porch with a cup of coffee gone cold, watching a snowy egret work the shallows at the edge of my property. The glades pressed up against my back fence, 80 feet of yard, and then the world ended and turned into something older and less patient. I'd lived here 15 years. I still didn't look out at it after dark. I asked where. She said, "The mangrove tunnels off the Turner River." I almost hung up right there. That's Glimp country. That's the stretch of swamp where Possum Tate took me when I was 22 years old, handed me a flashlight and a canteen and a folded piece of paper, and left me overnight with nothing but 6 rules and the instruction not to break any of them. I didn't sleep for 3 days after, not because of what I saw, because of what I almost saw, and the certainty, bone deep and permanent, that if I'd looked half a second longer, I'd have spent the rest of my life in a hospital room, staring at a wall. I took the job anyway. Her name was Carolyn Voss. Her daughter was Maya, 17. A junior naturalist award winner 2 years running, who'd apparently taken that distinction seriously enough to kayak into one of the most hostile ecosystems in North America alone at dawn, with no guide and no emergency beacon. They were staying at the Cypress Bay Lodge, a boutique property on the western edge of the Glades that charged $400 a night and advertised authentic wilderness experiences. The authentic wilderness had taken their daughter and the official search. State troopers, a Park Service boat, an airboat from the county had found nothing. Nothing. That's not what happens when a teenager tips her kayak and drowns. Drowning leaves things. The official search finding nothing meant Maya hadn't drowned. It meant she'd gone somewhere the search couldn't follow, or somewhere it instinctively didn't want to go without quite knowing why. I drove to Cypress Bay Lodge with my gear in the bed of my truck and the folded paper already in my shirt pocket. I'd put it there without thinking. the way you put on a seatbelt before a long drive. The husband, David Voss, shook my hand once, firm, and stepped back and let his wife do the talking. Carolyn Voss was maybe 48, and the last 24 hours had cost her something she normally kept locked down tight. Her eyes were raw at the edges, and she gripped her own wrist with her free hand the whole time we talked, a small, self-anchoring gesture she wasn't aware of. I asked the standard questions: departure time, kayak description, what she told the dock attendant, her gear, her phone, wrote it all down, kept my face neutral. "The Park Service boat went out for 6 hours," Carolyn Voss said. "They said they covered the whole river corridor." "They covered what they could access," I said. "The Turner River opens into about 40 square miles of mangrove tunnels past the first channel bend. Passages in there a motor skiff can't navigate." She looked at me steadily. "The resort manager said you charge double your standard rate for certain types of cases." "I do." She didn't ask what types. Sometimes people hire you for your willingness to go somewhere they understand. On some animal level, you should not go. "Fine, my daughter," she said. The Turner River put-in is a concrete ramp off a county road, shaded by tall cypresses that cut the light even at midday. I launched the airboat at 9:45 into water that was high and dark, stained the color of old tea by tannins leaching from the mangrove roots. 3 weeks of above-average rainfall had pushed water levels up and changed the geometry of the tunnel systems. Deeper, darker, more of the root structure submerged. I ran the airboat south, following the main channel. The motor was loud enough that I didn't have to think for the first 10 minutes. Just movement, just the familiar geography of the river, the sawgrass giving way to the first dense press of red mangroves as I turned southeast. I was reading the water wrong from the start. No ibis, no cormorants, no anhinga spreading its wings on the low branches. The channel was animal empty in both directions, which doesn't happen. You are never the only living thing on the Turner River. We were the only living thing on the Turner River. I pulled on my waders and stepped off into water that came to mid-thigh and pushed through to the cockpit. The seat was still dry. She'd gotten out before the kayak tipped. On the seat, centered like it had been placed there, was a single drop of something dark, black, sticky. The consistency of pine sap, but holding the light differently, absorbing slightly more than it should. Rule 5. The glimp weeps from its empty eyes. Black sap. If you find it on your gear, you're in its territory. If you find it on your skin, you have 1 hour to reach moving water. The drop was on the seat, not the hull. It had dripped from above. The glimp had been leaning over the kayak, over where Maya had been sitting. I filed that and straightened slowly. That's when I felt it, starting at the back of my neck. Not pain, exactly. A prickling, crawling awareness, like the skin was trying to alert the brain to something the eyes hadn't processed yet. I know that feeling. I've felt it 6 times in 15 years working glimp country, and each time it has been exactly what it felt like. Real, immediate, and not to be argued with. Rule 6. You will feel it before you see it. A prickling on the back of your neck. A sudden cold. The overwhelming urge to turn around. Do not turn around. The glimp wants you to look. It feeds on the moment of recognition. Every primate instinct I had was screaming at me to turn, to face whatever was behind me before it got any closer. I didn't turn. I stared at the kayak seat and breathed in through the nose, out through the mouth. I counted. 1, 2, 3. The cold hit at 7, a localized temperature drop, coming from directly behind me. I felt it cross my shoulders. Something large was close enough to change the air around me. 15. My hand found the pole without instruction, not as a weapon, just something solid, to keep the hand from shaking. 30. a sound to my right. Soft, liquid, water displacement. An alligator or a gar. The glimp makes no sound when it moves. Whatever made that noise was ordinary life, which meant it was over there. The thing behind me was still perfectly silent, which was worse. 50. I noticed I was holding my breath and forced myself to exhale. 70. The cold held steady, not intensifying, not retreating. Possum said the glimp doesn't have urgency the way animals do. It waits for the moment of recognition. The moment you look, that's when it moves. 98, 99, 100. I looked at the water, not behind me, at the water. Rule 2. Still water is a gift. The glimp cannot hide from water. It shows up clear as day in any reflection. But if you see it in the water, it sees you too. You have seconds to move. Between two mangrove roots, 4 feet to my right, there was a still patch of water, maybe 12 inches across, protected from any current, flat as a coin. I angled my gaze toward it carefully, not directly. Let my peripheral vision slide across its surface. I saw it. A tall figure, pale as bone, occupying the space directly behind me. Not standing, folded somehow into the gap between two mangrove trunks that couldn't have held a cat, let alone something that tall. Its proportions were wrong in a way the eye kept trying to smooth over and couldn't manage. Too long in the torso, arms at angles suggesting additional joints, and where the face should have been, empty sockets. Not damaged, not gouged, just empty, the way a mask has eye holes. And from both of them, slow and black, the sap tracked down what should have been cheekbones and dripped from the thing's chin into the water below. It was looking at my reflection. Rule 2. If you see it in the water, it sees you too. You have seconds. I moved. Not panicked. Panic in chest-deep water gets you killed. You slip, you go under, you thrash. I moved with deliberate speed, which is different from fast and harder to sustain. Sideways, not backward, not toward it, 3 steps to my left, eyes still on that still patch of water to my right. In the reflection, I saw the pale figure unfold slightly, one of those wrong-jointed arms reaching toward where I'd been standing. I reached the airboat, found the hull, swung up into it in one motion, and fired the engine before I was fully seated, the prop blast shaking the mangroves, blowing a spray of water across the roots. I ran the boat forward, deeper into the passage. Not back. Back meant turning around, and I was not turning around. The passage widened after 30 seconds into a small lagoon, maybe 40 feet across. I cut the engine and drifted into the shadow of an overhang. Looked back. The puddle between the roots was gone, broken by my wake. The space between the trunks was empty. Just shadow. Just root. Just the dripping of disturbed water going still again. I looked at my hands. They weren't shaking. That surprises me every time. I sat in the shadow of the overhang and breathed for a minute. The silence held. No birds had returned. The glimp was still close, where I was deep enough in its territory that the swamp was staying quiet out of old, earned caution. Those two conditions are not very different from each other. I reached into my shirt pocket and took out the paper. Folded so many times, it's soft as cloth now. That's not a figure of speech. The fibers have broken down from years of handling and humidity until the thing is more textile than document. I didn't unfold it. I know what it says. I've read it enough times that I could recite it in complete darkness, which I have done, more than once, in the years since Possum disappeared. 6 rules. 2 of them had already kept me alive in the first hour. Rule 6, the count, the discipline of not turning, and Rule 2, the reflection. Rule 5 had told me I was in territory before anything else. Rule 3 had told me it was close. Maya Voss had been here since yesterday morning. The glimp had dripped on her seat, dripped on it while she sat in it, and she'd gotten out and run. Without rules. On raw instinct. That she'd run at all was what kept her alive this long. She'd made the right call in the moment. Gotten out of the kayak, moved, put distance between herself and the glimp before it had her locked. People do that sometimes. The body knows things the mind doesn't have language for yet. But instinct has a shelf life. It burns through fast when the stakes are this high and the rules are this specific. I needed to find her before hers ran out. I put the paper back in my pocket and took out my GPS. Marked the lagoon, noted the kayak location, wrote the time and the sap description and the reflection sighting in my notebook. Evidence. Same discipline I'd kept for 20 years, tracking animals and people and the things that don't fit cleanly into either category. The glimp knew I was here now. It had seen my reflection at the same moment I'd seen it in mine. That's the symmetry Rule 2 doesn't advertise. It had reached for me and missed, and Possum always said that matters. He said the glimp is a studying thing. Every time it misses you, it's updating its model of how you move and how you think. Every time you survive it, it knows you a little better. That's what I had to work with. A thing that was learning me. In swamp it knew far better than I did. Hunting a girl who had no rules and no guide and no idea what she was running from. I picked up the pole and pushed the airboat forward, one slow length at a time. The mangrove canopy closed overhead until the light was green and filtered and wrong, the kind of light that makes distances unreliable. I moved the way Possum taught me, eyes in peripheral sweep, checking the reflections in every still patch of water I passed, never fixing on any one point. Nothing showed in any of them, which wasn't reassurance, which just meant the glimp was somewhere I wasn't looking. The silence stayed complete. I moved into it anyway. That's the job. You go where the evidence takes you, you follow the rules, and you try to stay alive long enough to bring someone home. The glimp was in these tunnels with both of us now. It knew I was hunting it. I had the paper in my pocket, soft as cloth. I kept going. The airboat was too loud for the tunnels, and too wide for where I needed to go. I'd known that going in. Past the lagoon where I'd sheltered after the reflection encounter, past the first major split, the passages narrowed to the width of a man's shoulders, in some places less. The airboat had gotten me as far as it could get me. I tied it to a prop root thick as my thigh, triple knotted the bowline and ran a second line 3 feet back. Not because of current. There was no current in here, the water black and still as old glass, but because I'd be coming back to it in the dark, possibly in a hurry, and a boat that had drifted even 6 inches in the wrong direction was a boat I couldn't find by feel. I lowered the canoe off the rear rack without a splash. That matters. Sound in the deep tunnels carries differently than in open water. The mangrove canopy baffles it, redirects it, does strange things to directionality. A loud noise in here doesn't echo clean. It smears. And I needed my ears for the one thing they were actually useful for out here. Detecting the absence of everything else. The silence was still absolute. No birds, no insects, no wind in the leaves above because the canopy was too dense for wind to reach. Just the soft sound of my paddle entering the water, the drip off the blade when I lifted it, and underneath both of those, nothing. The specific, pressing nothing that Rule 3 had named. I paddled slowly, keeping strokes short and controlled, checking both water surfaces at every turn. Rule 2. Near side, far side, ahead, repeat. Never the same sequence twice running, because patterns are predictable and predictable gets you killed. I was maybe 20 minutes past the airboat when I found the first footprint. It was in the silt at the base of a prop root, a small shelf of sediment that had built up over years. Small. A water shoe, rubber sole, mesh upper, pointed toward the deeper tunnels. The edge definition was still sharp, which in this mud meant 12 hours, maybe less. She'd been moving fast, the toe dug in, the heel print shallow. not waiting with purpose. Fleeing. I marked the position on my GPS and kept moving. The second sign came 10 minutes later, a strip of orange fabric caught on a branch stub at chest height. Nylon. Waterproof. Matching the rain jacket description Carolyn Voss had given me. Torn, not cut. She'd been moving fast enough to snag it without noticing, or had noticed and kept going anyway. Same information either way. The third sign stopped me cold, wedged into a crevice in a mangrove root about 4 feet above the waterline. A small rectangle of white, protected from humidity by the overhang above it. Waterproof paper, folded once. The handwriting was hurried but legible. She'd pressed hard. It's behind me. I can't see it, but I feel it. If anyone finds this, don't follow. I read it twice, folded it, and put it in my vest pocket. Don't follow. She'd written it knowing someone might come looking. She was trying to protect whoever came after her. Some part of her brain was still functioning past pure survival instinct. She hadn't completely broken yet. That was the best information I'd gotten all day. I kept following. The hummock appeared 20 minutes later, materializing out of the tunnel like something the swamp had been hiding deliberately. A dry hummock. A small island of elevated ground, higher than the surrounding water table. Thick with saw palmetto and young cypress, maybe 40 feet across. I'd worked the Turner River corridor for 15 years, and I didn't have it on any map I'd ever seen. Either the elevated water level had shifted the approach routes enough that it was newly accessible, or it had always been here, and every person who'd found it before had not come back to report it. Both possibilities were equally unwelcome. I beached the canoe on the muddy edge and stood in the shallows. Just listening. Just watching the water around me in that unfocused, peripheral way. Nothing moved in any of the reflections. The silence was not just absolute, it was specific. The kind of silence that has a center. On the hummock, half collapsed into the palmetto scrub, was a chickee hut. Old, the wood silver gray with age, the palmetto thatch roof caved in on one side, the elevated floor platform tilted where 2 support posts had rotted through. Seminal construction, probably 100 years old or more. Except one person had been here recently. Flattened palmetto where someone had pushed through. Disturbed mud at the base of the platform where someone had climbed up. I waded ashore and approached. The sap was on the first post I passed, black, weeping, freshly bled, wet enough to stick. Not territory marking the way the kayak seat drop had been. This was active occupation. I checked the next post. More sap. And the next. Every post of the chickee that I could see had the same mark at roughly chest height on a tall man, which meant it hadn't dripped down from anything that moves the way a man moves. Rule 5. The sap is how it marks its hunting ground. This wasn't just territory. This was a feeding ground. Visited regularly enough that the sap was still wet. I stopped the rest of that thought and climbed up onto the tilted platform. Maya's backpack was in the far corner, wedged between 2 warped floorboards to keep it from sliding down the slope. Dark blue day pack, technical hiking frame. I went through it fast without moving it. Water bottle half empty, granola bar sealed, field notebook swollen with humidity, dead phone, unopened first aid kit. She'd been here. She'd left in a hurry. She'd left without her pack. I looked up. In the corner of the chickee, just past the collapsed section of roof, there was a gap in the floorboards. Not rot, not structural failure. Clean-edged, as though something had separated the boards with precision, creating a space roughly 18 inches long and 4 inches wide. A space that shouldn't exist in the floor of a chickee hut. A space that by any reasonable assessment couldn't hold anything larger than a small animal. Rule 4. Always check the spaces that shouldn't hold a body. Always look where something could be folded. That's where it waits. I checked it. I crossed the tilted floor to the corner, crouched down over the gap, and looked into it. Black water below. The smell of deep mud. The gap ran the full width of the boards, and I could see through to the waterlogged ground 3 feet beneath the platform. Nothing visible. Nothing. Something moved in my peripheral vision. To the left, low and fast and large. Larger than it should have been in that corner of the hut, where the collapsed roof had reduced the available space to something too cramped for anything bigger than a raccoon. Every trained instinct I have said, don't look directly. Widen your gaze. Let it come to you at the edge of your vision where you can see it without it knowing. I snapped my head left and looked directly at it. 20 years of experience. 15 years knowing the rule. I broke it anyway, in under a second, without a conscious decision. The movement in my peripheral vision triggered something older and faster than training. 1 second. That's how long it lasted. It was unfolded. That was the only word I had for it. Unfolded. The way something compressed into an impossibly small space expands to its full extent. Except its full extent was wrong in a way I don't have clean language for. Too tall for the space it occupied, which should have been impossible given the collapsed roof. Standing at angles that didn't account for gravity the way standing things are supposed to. The torso too long, the arms too long, the joints bending in directions joints don't bend. Empty sockets, fixed on my face, weeping black. Then my brain did what brains do when they encounter something with no category. It rejected the image, not gradually, instantly. One frame I was seeing it, the next I was staring at the corner of a collapsed chickie hut. Warped gray boards, fallen thatch, nothing else. The image erased itself the way a dream dissolves 3 seconds after waking. But the cold was there. The ambient cold of the tunnels had narrowed to something focused and immediate. The same cold I'd felt behind me at the kayak site, but now in front of me and to the left. And I was crouched with my weight forward in the worst possible position for moving fast. I had looked directly at it. Rule 1. Broken. The displaced air hit next. A pressure change, a wave of movement from something massive shifting its weight in a space that could not have held it. I didn't wait for what came after. I dropped. Off the side of the elevated platform, into the water and mud below. 3 feet of drop, and I hit the bottom with my knees and palms and went completely under. Black water, cold, tannin and rot in my mouth. I pushed off the bottom and came up moving, wading as fast as you can wade in chest-deep water through a mangrove root system, which is not fast enough, and I knew it. Behind me, nothing. No sound, no splash. The glimp makes no sound when it moves. That's the worst part of it. You can't track it by ear. You can only track it by what it does to everything else. I needed still water, and I was making everything move. There was a slough to my left, a slightly deeper channel between the hummock's edge and a dense root cluster, 6 feet of open water surface. I angled toward it, got my feet under me, and stopped. Standing chest deep in the black water, I stopped moving, held myself still, let the surface settle. 4 seconds. 4 seconds of standing in the silence, feeling the cold at my back, not looking behind me, not turning. Then the surface of the slough flattened out. I looked at it. Behind me and to the right, at the hummock's muddy edge, the glimp was in the water, its reflection sharp and complete in the settling surface. Tall, pale, wrong. One long arm extended toward where I'd been standing on the platform, reaching for the space I'd vacated when I dropped. It had missed by the margin of my fall. It was already turning toward me. The canoe was beached 10 feet to my left along the hummock's edge. I moved left, perpendicular, not away from it, not toward it, keeping my eyes down, using the reflection to track the pale shape. I saw it orient toward me, saw one of those wrong-jointed arms extend again. My hand found the canoe hull. I shoved it out from the bank, swung into it in one motion, got the paddle in the water, and pulled hard. The canoe shot forward into the tunnel entrance, and I pulled again and again. And I was in the passage, and the hummock was behind me, and the only sound in the world was my paddle and my breathing and the drip off the blade. I paddled hard, blind. I didn't look back. 2 minutes before the cold faded to something less immediate, less acute threat, and more close pursuit. Still behind me, just further back. I paddled for another 3 minutes before I let myself slow enough to look at my arms. Right arm, nothing. Left arm, between the wrist and elbow, on the inside of the forearm, a smear of black sap the size and shape of 4 fingers pressed together. Not a drip, not a territory mark. The pattern of direct contact. The glimp had touched me, had reached through the water during those 4 seconds I'd held still, letting the surface settle. I'd felt nothing. No sting, no impact, no sensation whatsoever. That was worse than pain would have been. Rule 5, if you find it on your skin, you've already been touched. You have 1 hour to reach open water. The glimp cannot cross deep water with a current. 1 hour. I took out my GPS. The Turner River channel, nearest moving water, tidal influence keeping a slow real current through even at low tide, was 2.3 miles from my current position through the tunnel system. Open water, 25 minutes. In the tunnels, with turns and route obstacles and reflection checks at every bend, closer to 45. 45 minutes to moving water, 15 minutes of margin. I'd held still for 4 seconds at the hummock, 2 minutes paddling before I checked, 3 minutes after, 9 minutes gone from my hour, 51 left. The sap on my arm was already warm, not body temperature warm, slightly warmer than that, the way a healing bruise runs hot. I watched it for 5 seconds. It pulsed, slow, regular, synced to my heartbeat. Possum had never told me what happened if you didn't make the hour. He'd just said 1 hour, with the flat certainty of a man who had observed what came before and after that threshold and was not interested in describing the after. The specificity of the number, not quickly, not as soon as possible, but 1 hour, exactly, suggested precision. A mechanism with a definite edge. I did not want to find out what was on the other side of that edge. I checked the reflection to my left. Still water, mangrove shadow, nothing pale. I checked the right. Same. Behind me, the hummock. Gone now in the tunnel's green dark. In front of me, 45 minutes of tunnel system, a broken rule, and a countdown already running on my arm. I put the paddle in the water. I started counting seconds under my breath. And I didn't look back. The tunnels all looked the same after the first 10 minutes. That's not a complaint. I wasn't lost, not technically. I had the GPS and the compass and 15 years of this corridor burned into the part of my brain that handles spatial memory. But the deep mangrove system past the hummock was old growth, undisturbed, and in the elevated water, all the usual landmarks were submerged or rearranged. Every passage looked like every other passage. Green light filtered through the canopy in the same flat, directionless way. I paddled by compass heading and counted my strokes. The sap on my arm had been warm since I found it. Now, 12 minutes out from the hummock, it was hot. Not burning. I still had full sensation, still had grip strength, but running noticeably above body temperature, the way a bad infection feels before it becomes a fever. I checked it when I could spare the attention. Same smear, same 4-finger shape, slightly darker than before. I didn't check it more than I had to. Watching the GPS clock was more useful. 43 minutes remaining. 2 miles to the Turner River channel. In the tunnels, with the turns and the route obstacles and the reflection checks at every bend. Closer to 45 minutes of paddling. The math was already thin, and it wasn't getting better. The silence had not broken. Not once in the 12 minutes since the hummock. The Glades at full noise is a continuous orchestral performance. There is always something alive and announcing its aliveness somewhere within earshot. The Glades at this kind of silence is a different place entirely, operating under different rules. Rule 3. The scariest sound in the glades is absolute silence. When the bugs stop, when the birds go quiet, when even the wind holds its breath, the glimp is close. I could feel the weight of it at my back. Not the prickling of Rule 6 that had faded about 5 minutes after I'd cleared the hummock. Something more diffuse, the particular pressure of being tracked. I checked the reflections at every turn, left, right, ahead, and nothing showed in any of them, which didn't mean it wasn't there. It meant it hadn't positioned itself at the edge of any still water mirror I'd managed to check. Those were not the same thing. At the 30-minute mark, 1.1 miles remaining, 15 minutes of margin still intact. I was maintaining pace. Then I heard the splash. Ahead of me, around a bend in the passage, maybe 40 feet. A single heavy splash, the sound a person makes when they lose their footing in water. Not a controlled step. A fall. Weight and panic, and no grace at all. Then the silence slammed back down. The glimp makes no sound when it moves. That splash had been real, produced by something with mass and no coordination. I brought the canoe forward, one careful stroke at a time, past the bend, into a wider section of tunnel where the canopy opened to let in a column of gray afternoon light. She was waist-deep in the water, maybe 25 feet ahead of me. Orange rain jacket, dark pants, one water shoe missing from her right foot. Facing away from me, toward the far end of the passage, standing completely still, both arms at her sides. Her head tilted slightly, the way you tilt when you're trying to hear something at the edge of perception. She was staring at the empty air at the end of the passage. Not at anything I could see. Just tunnel, roots, water, shadow. Nothing there. Nothing I could see. Maya Voss was alive. I understood the mechanics in the 2 seconds it took to register. The glimp positions itself in the exact center of a person's direct field of vision, in the blind spot where the brain edits out what it doesn't want to process. She saw nothing, because that's what the glimp was to direct vision. But the body knew. Every animal nerve she had was screaming that something was wrong about that specific patch of empty air. She was transfixed, frozen between the instinct to run and the older instinct that said, "Don't look away from the predator." Except, looking is the problem, not looking away. I brought the canoe against a root mass and kept my voice low and level. The professional voice. The one that says, "I've done this before. You're going to be fine if you do exactly what I say." Maya. She didn't move. Maya, don't look at it. Look at me. Look at my face. Her shoulders tightened. She'd heard me, but her gaze stayed locked on that empty patch of tunnel. I understood that too. Looking away from the glimp when it's standing in your direct field of vision is not a natural act. Every survival instinct insists on visual confirmation of a threat before disengaging. The glimp lives in that instinct. It exploits the exact reflex evolution built to keep you alive, turning it into a trap. She couldn't look away on her own. I needed to give her somewhere else to go. But I needed to confirm its position first. I took my canteen from my vest, aluminum, flat-sided, and poured a slow stream of water onto the surface of a broad-leafed mangrove plant growing low from the root mass beside me, letting it pool in the leaf's natural cup until I had a shallow mirror 4 inches across. I lifted it, angled it past Maya toward the end of the tunnel she was facing, used my peripheral vision on the surface. There. Unfolded to its full height in the narrow end of the passage. Pale, wrong, the proportions all off in the ways I'd already cataloged in the Chicky hut. Too tall, too long, the arm joints describing angles with no anatomical name. The empty sockets tilted toward Maya, toward the top of her head, not her face, which meant it was waiting. not in the act yet. Waiting for her to do the one thing that would trigger whatever came next. Waiting for her to look directly at it. I checked the sap on my arm without lowering the leaf mirror. Still hot, still pulsing, still counting. Maya. Louder now. When I count to 3, close your eyes. Don't ask questions. Close your eyes and swim toward my voice. Don't open them until you feel my hand. She made a sound. Small, not a word, but she'd heard me and was processing it. I took that for yes. 1. In the leaf mirror, the pale figure hadn't moved. The tilt of the empty sockets may have increased fractionally, dropping slightly lower toward her face. It was reacting to my voice. 2. Maya's hands came up slightly. The reflex that precedes closing your eyes when everything in you is insisting they stay open. 3. She closed her eyes. She went under for half a second, lost her footing, dropped to shoulder depth, and then she was moving, swimming blind, arms pulling through the black water in a desperate, uncoordinated stroke. The most deliberate thing I'd seen her do since I'd found her. In the leaf mirror, the glimp did not move toward her. Possum had told me once, in the oblique way he told me things, as observation, not instruction, that the glimp needs the moment of recognition. The eye contact, the moment when the prey acknowledges what it's seeing. Without that trigger, the mechanism doesn't engage. Maya had closed her eyes and denied it the trigger. In the reflection, a tilt of the head that functioned like confusion in a thing that had no face to be confused with. 7 seconds of stillness. Then a lateral shift. The glimp beginning to move sideways along the tunnel wall, compressing into the gap between the passage's narrowest point and the root mass, repositioning. Rule 4. Always look where something could be folded. That's where it waits. It was finding a new angle. I didn't give it time. Maya's hand hit the canoe hull. I grabbed her wrist, cold, shaking, and pulled her up and over the gunwale. Not gentle, not trying to be. She landed on her hands and knees in the bilge water with her eyes still closed, and I had the paddle in the water before she'd finished orienting herself. Stay down. Eyes closed. Hold the sides. I paddled, hard and fast, back to the junction and left, the direct line to the Turner River channel. Not the way I'd come in, not toward the repositioning pale shape in the reflection behind me. I checked the water as I moved. Nothing in the surfaces to either side, nothing ahead. The cold was everywhere now, ambient rather than localized, the entire tunnel system running below temperature. The glimp was moving somewhere I couldn't see it, which, after the broken Rule 1, I'd been half expecting. It knew me better now. It had my scent, in whatever sense that metaphor was accurate, and it was hunting differently, not from a fixed position. Moving. I paddled faster. 15 minutes in, I stopped counting minutes. Counting was not helping, and paddling was. I drove the canoe through the tunnel system on compass and GPS and the muscle memory of 15 years, checking reflections, navigating turns, keeping Maya low in the bow where her weight was centered and the canoe ran stable. She was quiet, which was the best thing she could do for both of us. After a few minutes, she started counting softly under her breath, 1 to 10 and back again, some kind of self-regulation. The thing the brain reaches for when the rational mind has nothing useful to offer. I didn't tell her to stop. The sound of it was proof she was still functional. The sap went from hot to burning somewhere around the 12-minute mark. Heat without pain. The kind of signal that means the damage is past the point where warning is useful. I pressed my elbow against my side and paddled with my shoulders. At 7 minutes on the clock, I smelled the river. Moving water in the glades has a specific character. Cleaner, more oxygenated, carrying the faint salt influence of the tidal reach. After 2 hours in the still water tunnels, where the air had the flat, mineral quality of something long enclosed, the river smell arrived like a change in pressure. The tunnel widened. The canopy thinned. Late afternoon light came in directional and gold instead of the flat, filtered green of the deep passages. One more turn. The passage opened into the Turner River channel. Current. Slow but real. Tidal reach keeping the water moving, the surface broken, carrying tannin foam and floating debris downstream. I drove the canoe through the tunnel mouth and into it. The moment we crossed from still water into current, the sap went cold. Not gradually. A switch. The pulsing stopped. The heat stopped. The sense of being tethered to something at the other end of it stopped. I looked at my arm as the canoe turned in the current and watched the smear go matte and flat, and then, over about 15 seconds, begin to flake at its edges like dried mud. Rule 5. The glimp cannot cross deep water with a current. It can only hunt in the still places. 7 minutes to spare. I grounded the canoe on a sandbar in the middle of the channel. A low spit of white sand built up on the inside of a broad bend, and put the paddle down. Looked back at the tunnel mouth. Dark. Still. Nothing pale moved in the broken current near the entrance. "Maya," I said, "open your eyes." She opened them. She looked at the open channel, the wide sky, the late afternoon light coming in low and gold over the sawgrass on the far bank. She looked at it all the way. You look at something you thought you'd never see again. Then the shaking started. Real shaking, full body, the kind that comes when the adrenaline runs out and the body starts taking inventory of everything it's been through. She wrapped her arms around herself and shook. I checked the sap. Most of it was gone now, flaking away into the current. The skin underneath was pale and smooth and slightly different in texture than the skin around it. I pressed my thumb to it. No sensation, just pressure. A patch 3 inches across that had gone quiet. I noted it and moved on. "I saw it," Maya said. Her voice was barely above a whisper, rough with cold and hours of not speaking. "When I opened my eyes, just for a second, it had no face." She was looking at the tunnel mouth. I looked at it too. What she'd seen was the edge of it, the shape of the absence, the outline of the negative space, the dream image that recedes as you wake. She'd opened her eyes in motion, already crossing into moving water, the canoe carrying her out of the still places before the image could fully register. She'd gotten the moment before seeing it, not the thing itself. That was why she was alive. She'd denied it the moment of recognition, closed her eyes at the critical second, and swum blind toward a stranger's voice in the dark. Not because she knew the rules, because some part of her had understood, below the level of language, that seeing it was the wrong answer. Smart girl. Or lucky. I've found the two are harder to separate than most people think. "What was it?" she asked. "The swamp," I said. "Just the swamp." She looked at the tunnel mouth one more time. Then she looked away, which was exactly the right thing to do. The current ran south around the sandbar, carrying the last flakes of black sap downstream. The light was holding, but it wouldn't hold much longer. We had miles of river still to cover, and I had an airboat to get back to or abandon, and the Voss family was waiting at the Cypress Bay Lodge, expecting a phone call I'd promised by nightfall. None of that was the immediate problem. The immediate problem was that we'd used 48 of our 51 minutes on the clock. We were alive. Maya was alive. The sap was gone, and the rule about moving water was still true. 7 minutes to spare. That would have to be enough. The sandbar gave us maybe 10 minutes before I made myself move. Maya had stopped shaking, not because she was warm, but because her body had run through the acute phase and settled into the dull, deep cold that hypothermia moves into when it isn't being treated. She was sitting in the bilge water of the canoe with her knees pulled up, staring at the sawgrass on the far bank. Not at the tunnel mouth. That was progress. I checked her eyes. Pupils equal. Tracking. She knew where she was. "We have to move," I said. "Can you paddle?" She took the paddle I held out without answering. The sun had dropped below the mangrove line while we'd rested. The light was still there. 40 minutes of it, maybe. But it had gone amber and flat. The long, horizontal light of late afternoon sliding toward dusk. I've guided fishing trips on this river at every hour for 20 years. It's beautiful at dusk. It's also when the wading birds come in to roost and the light plays tricks with the reflections. When still water looks like moving water, and moving water looks like glass. Possum Tate had said it once. In the offhand way he said things he expected you to file away. The glimp favors the dissolving light. Dusk and dawn. When the eyes are recalibrating, that's when it's hardest to read the water clean. I'd filed it. I was using it now. "Paddle," I said, and put the canoe into the current. The Turner River Channel runs roughly north from the tunnel junction to the county road put in where I'd launched that morning. 4 miles, with a broad westward bend 2/3 of the way up. In the canoe with the tidal current doing some of the work, an hour, maybe less. We had 40 minutes of usable light. I didn't tell Maya that. The current was stronger than the morning, outgoing tide adding maybe half a knot to our pace. The channel surface was moving and broken, and gold in the late light, which made it nearly useless for Rule 2. I used the bank margins instead, the still water in the root systems where current didn't reach, where the surface stayed flat. Left bank, right bank, left, alternating. Every 30 seconds. The broken center of the river was no good as a mirror. The still margins were all I had. 15 minutes into the paddle, the wading birds stopped. Not the gradual quiet of birds settling for the night. The abrupt stop, every bird on both banks, simultaneously, mid-call. The way a power cut kills every light in a room at once. Rule 3. When the birds go quiet, when even the wind holds its breath, the glimp is close. But we were in moving water. The glimp couldn't be in the channel. I looked at the western bank and saw the problem. 3 weeks of elevated rainfall had created a belt of flooded root systems along the western edge, maybe 8 feet wide in places, 15 in others, where completely still water sat between the moving channel and the mangrove wall. Not current. Still. Technically outside the channel. Rule 5's protection applied to current, and that margin wasn't current. The glimp could reach the still margin. If it could reach from the still margin to us in the moving water, I angled the canoe hard right toward the center of the channel and paddled. 25 minutes in, we came around the broad westward bend and I saw the airboat, tied where I'd left it, in the small pocket of calm water at the east bank. But sitting wrong. The stern was down by 3 inches. Not a water shipping problem, no water coming in over the transom. Something inside the hull was adding weight. "Stop paddling," I said. "Stay still." I let the canoe drift and checked the still water pocket at the mooring. Peripheral, careful. The surface there was flat as a mirror, protected from current on all sides, and in that mirror, folded into the space between the airboat hull and the waterline. A pale shape. Long and wrong in the familiar way. The arm geometry visible even at this distance, shoulder line too high, elbow placement wrong, one arm extended under the hull as if bracing. It had moved ahead of us through the still water margins of the river system, arrived at the airboat before we did, and folded itself into the hull to wait. It had been there for however long we'd been paddling from the sandbar. Rule 4. The glimp can fit anywhere. Under your boat? It fits. Always check the spaces that shouldn't hold a body. I'd checked when I launched. I hadn't checked when I came back. That was the error I was living with. 2 options. Neither good. Option 1. Approach the airboat. The mooring pocket was still water. Glimp territory. Getting close enough to untie lines meant entering that pocket with the glimp 3 feet away inside the hull. Option 2. Abandon the boat, take the canoe to the put-in. But the western bank's still water margin ran the entire remaining 1.5 miles of channel. If the glimp left the airboat and moved into that margin, it had a parallel corridor of still water all the way to the put-in. 1.5 miles of hunting ground running alongside us in the dark. Possum had said, "You don't have to beat it. You just have to be less wrong than it expects you to be." The glimp was in a defined space. A shape I knew. A position I had. Rule 4 cuts both ways. If you know where it's folded, you know exactly where it is. That's the only time in any engagement with the glimp that you have that advantage. It was in the airboat hull, in the still water pocket, and it hadn't moved because it didn't know I'd seen it. I'd read it peripherally, not with a direct gaze, so Rule 2's symmetry hadn't triggered. I reached into my vest for the flare gun. Marine unit, 12 gauge, single shot, loaded. I'd carried it for 3 years without firing it in the field. I broke the barrel, confirmed the load by feel, closed it without taking my eyes off the marginal reflection. I raised the gun and aimed at the still water reflection of the hull, not at the boat itself, at the reflected image. The geometry of reflection places the real object exactly where the reflected image appears to be. I was pointing at the hull through its own mirror. I fired. The sound hammered the river corridor. The flare crossed 30 feet and hit the hull at the waterline. Magnesium caught. Fiberglass burns fast, it's plastic with pretensions, and the flame spread in the rolling orange way fiberglass burns, with dense black smoke and no hesitation. In the reflection, the pale shape moved. Fast, faster than anything I'd seen it move across this entire day, which is saying something. It unfolded from the hull in one convulsive motion and hit the water on the far side of the airboat. Still water, east bank margin, and then it was into the roots and gone. Into the dark, between the mangroves, into whatever folded space the east bank provided. No sound, no splash, nothing. The airboat burned. That boat had 14 years on it. I'd rebuilt the engine myself, twice. I watched it go in the reflection because looking directly at a burning thing at dusk destroys your night vision, and I needed my night vision, and the practical consideration of that made me feel like myself again in a way that nothing else in the past 30 seconds had managed. I put the flare gun back in my vest. "Paddle," I said. We covered the last mile in the dark. Not full dark. A thin light still held in the western sky when the put-in came into view. The concrete ramp, pale gray in the dusk. 2 silhouettes at the water's edge. Carolyn Voss had driven out and waited when I hadn't called by nightfall, which was the only thing a person in her position could do. I checked the margins one final time as we came in. Both banks. Still water pockets. The gap under the concrete ramp. The dark space where current didn't reach. Peripheral, systematic. Nothing showed. The canoe hit the ramp and Carolyn Voss was in the water before I'd shipped the paddle, and she had Maya by both arms, and Maya let herself be held with the dead, passive weight of someone who has spent everything they had. David Voss stood at the top of the ramp with his jaw set in the way of a man releasing 40 hours of controlled fear into something manageable. Gratitude is what you get when the worst-case scenario doesn't happen. After a minute, Carolyn Voss looked up at me over her daughter's shoulder. "What happened?" she said. "She got turned around in the tunnels. Dehydration, mild hypothermia. Kept herself in the shallows. I found her about 2 miles in." I looked at Maya when I said it. She was watching me from her mother's arms. The specific expression of someone who knows the story they're being given isn't the story and understands, without needing it explained, why that's the right call. "She'll be fine. Warm her up, hydrate her. She'll sleep 12 hours and feel mostly normal after." David Voss shook my hand at the ramp and asked about the airboat. I told him it had sustained field damage. He added it to whatever number he was running and didn't ask what kind of field damage burns a fiberglass hull to the waterline. Some people are good at not asking the questions they don't want answered. They drove away, taillights around the curve on the county road, and then just the river and the dark and the sound of the current. The wading birds started calling again from the Sawgrass Islands downstream. A great blue barked once from the near dark, then another, the ambient sound of the river coming back on, instrument by instrument. The silence had broken. The glimp had moved off. I stood on the concrete ramp by myself for a minute, listening to the birds come back, and then I loaded the canoe onto my trailer and drove home. My shack sits where the glades press up against the edge of the county road, 80 feet of yard, and then the world ends. I've been here 15 years. I know every sound the place makes at night. Nothing was off. I ate cold rice and beans at the kitchen table and drank one beer and didn't look directly at the back window. The yard was empty. The swamp was running its normal catalog, frogs in the ditch, the great horned owl on its usual line to the south. No hard silence, no held breath. Just ordinary swamp doing ordinary things in the dark. I washed the plate and went into the bathroom. The sap was long gone, flaked away hours ago in the river current. What remained was the mark it left, a patch of skin on the inside of my left forearm, palm-sized, pale and smooth, the texture slightly different from the surrounding skin. Settled, permanent looking. I pressed my thumb into the center of it. Nothing. Not numbness. Numbness implies something being suppressed. This was the absence of the nerve signal itself, like pressing on a photograph of skin rather than the skin. I held my arm under the light for a moment. Then I looked up at the mirror, my own face. Behind me, the bathroom door, the dark hallway, the kitchen light through the far doorway. For 1 second, the mirror showed something in the hallway that the direct view hadn't. Not a shape, not a figure. A quality of the darkness at the hallway's edge, a density, a specific wrongness in the way the shadow sat at the doorframe, as if the space it occupied was folded rather than open. Then it was just a hallway. I didn't turn around. I fixed my eyes on my own reflection and counted. 1, 2. The cold arrived at around 20. That localized, focused cold I knew by now as well as I knew any sensation in my body. I kept counting. 50. 60. The cold began to fade at 80, was gone by 93. I reached 100. I looked at the hallway in the mirror first. Then I turned and looked at it directly. Empty. Kitchen light through the far doorway. The normal dark. I turned the bathroom light off and went to bed. Possum used to say, "You don't kill the glimp. You can't. You just survive it. And every time you survive, it learns a little more about you." I looked at my arm in the morning, the dead patch of skin, palm-sized and permanent, and thought about what it had learned today. It had learned I use water as a mirror, that I count to 100, that I move sideways instead of back, that I'll burn a 14-year-old airboat rather than give it a fixed position. I wondered if it knew my name now. I wondered if the hallway had been hunting, or just attention, the particular quality of focus a thing develops for something it's decided is worth remembering. Those two things might not be different with the glimp. I folded the paper, put it back in my shirt pocket. There would be another call. There always was. Another voice on the phone with the specific timbre of panic that hasn't quite accepted it's real yet. And I would go back into the still places with the 6 rules and the dead patch of skin and the permanent cold I'd carry in that bathroom mirror from now on, for the rest of my life, every time I looked too long at my own reflection. because that's the job, and the rules are still in my pocket, soft as cloth, waiting for the next time the silence falls.